Good evening. I'm going to call the Board of Selectmen meeting for June 13th, 2016 to order. As required by the open meeting law, we are informing you that the town will be video and audio taping as well as broadcasting this public meeting. In addition, anyone who intends to video or audio tape this meeting is required to notify the chair now. Okay, please join and rise me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Join me. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Anyone for weekly briefing? Hearing none. Public comment and announcement. First, I'd like to congratulate Police Officer Derek Dutra, Deputy Police Chief Tom Gagnon, and Fire Chief Norm Clark in receiving an award this week at Bentley College for performing CPR and saving a woman's life last year. It's great to have you guys, and to both chiefs, thank your whole team. I'd also like to offer our thoughts and prayers to the victims, the families and friends of the horrible Orlando massacre. There is a vigil tonight being held at Pilgrim Congregational Church in Harwich. It starts at 7, but to those at home, that starts. Any other public comments and announcements?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I want to introduce our latest newly minted full-time police officer, hopefully after your vote on the consent agenda tonight. This is Ryan Fazzino. He may look familiar to you. We were before you in April appointing Ryan as a part-time officer so he could come on board and start his field training. Ryan is a real find. He did an excellent job in the selection process, and he came to us already academy trained. So he's going, as soon as he's doing an outstanding job with his field training, we anticipate him coming off field training about mid-July, and he'll go right on the road. So we're recommending him tonight to be appointed full-time as of July 1st. And he will be our 34th position. That's the position that's funded for this upcoming budget cycle that's going to backfill our patrol investigator slot that's going to work on the opiate issues in town.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, any other public comments? All set? Can I get a motion on the consent agenda?
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the consent agenda and A, approve the minutes from May 31st, 2016, regular session, and C, approve the FY 2017 miscellaneous appointments, D, approve the FY 2017 annual police appointments, E, approve the appointment of Ryan Fazzino as a full-time regular police officer effective July 1st, 2016, with an annual salary of $46,020.21, P3, Step 1. And F, approve and authorize the chair to sign the cooperative agreement with the Barnstable County for dredging program.
Second.
And just one comment, we are taking B and G out of order. We have questions on those. Any discussion on what's been read? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve B, approve the FY 2017 committee reappointments.
Can I get a second on that?
Second.
Okay, Peter had a question about this.
Yeah, my concern is with the appointments on Historic District Commission. To my knowledge, there's been issues on attendance in the last year. I also point out that when this board was interested in and still is interested in the columns at the library, and Bob Caffarelli, the town engineer, brought forward fiberglass reinforced plastic columns as the preferred method to go. Actually demonstrated them to some of these folks, and the Historic District Commission decided they didn't want to do that. I'll point out to you, because I went to town council after that and said, what's the recourse for the Board of Selectmen on a decision like that? There are only two recourses. One is power of appointment, The other is that we could go to the state judicial Supreme Court if we wanted to, which is a very expensive and time-consuming thing to do. I think as a minimum, that the individuals here who are put forward for reappointment should at least be interviewed by the interview committee, find out what the attendance issues are, and any other issues that might be involved, and just go through that exercise, if you will, and then report back to this board. So with that, my suggestion is that you amend the motion to include everyone except for the appointments related to Historical District Commission, if you're so inclined.
Any other comments?
Are you making that as a motion?
I would make that as a amended motion, sure.
So what Peter's asking is that we accept the approval of the FY17 committee reappointments with the exception of Historic District Commission.
And that's depending upon an interview.
An interview, yes.
You can bring it back. We can have the discussion further.
Then I'll second it for discussion.
I have a question. So you're saying that the two people that are up for reappointment are the two people that have attendance issues, to your knowledge?
No, I only know one that has attendance issues,
Okay.
okay? But I think that because I have issues with just the reappointment, I think the committee should interview both and have those discussions. Also have a discussion about plastic versus wood, and, you know, I think we were very clear, the town engineer was very clear in a direction that was going to save the town money, be more cost-effective, reduce maintenance costs in the future. And I think there's some issues just associated with, you know, saying we're going to use wood and 100 yards away. You know, one of the members here has plenty of plastic columns all over the place on this building, so I'm a little concerned about that. It's like a double standard.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Any more comments?
Just a comment that, you know, certainly we'll do another interview.
Well, that hasn't been voted yet.
But if that's what the vote is, but I'm not sure where that will lead, so.
I don't know that we can interview based on the fact that a particular member is not agreeing to plastic columns. I don't know that that is actually legal.
Well, that wasn't that was not entirely what Peter said. It was an attendance issue. The plastic column issue was one, and we certainly have the right and the ability to re-interview anyone. We're making a blanket statement here, reappointing everybody. One board member has received complaints, so we're asking that that committee be re-interviewed.
And quite frankly, if I recall correctly, when it was time for the annual report to the Board of Selectmen, I think we actually got stood up on this one, so.
We did.
There's some
I
issues
remember
there.
that.
No, there's some
I
issues
remember
there.
that.
I mean, there's some issues, you know?
All right.
And we had the power of
We never
appointment,
got
that's the only power we have, so,
All right.
okay?
Okay, no more comments from the board? Ed McManus?
Personally, I don't know the members of the Historic District Commission's reasons for their vote, but I do know that Harwich Center is a nationally registered historic district, and generally speaking, as you rehab buildings in that district, you should follow the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines on rehabilitation of historic structures. The bank building that's part of the library certainly qualifies as one of the more historic structures in town. Their guideline says that you are to, in making repairs, reuse the existing material to the greatest extent possible and only replace it when it is reached a point of deterioration beyond repair. That's not the case with those columns, and further goes on to the point where if you do replace it, you should replace it with material in kind. I also know that if, I'm not sure what the funding was going to be for the work on the columns, but it's a requirement of Community Preservation Act funding for use on historic renovation projects, that you're to follow the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines.
Thank you, Ed. I would ask that before we go to vote on this, that the board send any questions to the interview committee that they might have on the commission before you interview.
Mhm.
Okay? So we have a motion and a second? Oh, Norm, sorry.
I understand the frustration, and I understand you wanting to make it as realistic and bring it back, but I think in certain areas where you have to use a little bit of common sense and look at what, technology's been able to do. I will also say, Bob Caffarelli's not here, but he's an expert. I've been before boards.
He just walked in, right as you were saying that.
I'm going to speak for him anyway. I've been before boards and asked to present on professional issues that I'm very aware of and very knowledgeable in, and you're not listened to. So I think it's frustrating when you go before these well-intended, and they are. They dedicate their time and they want the best. But there is a time and a place when you need to listen to the professionals. And Bob Caffarelli is a professional, and he knows what he's doing. I know he wants the historic value, but he's also looking after all of us who have to pay the bill.
Thank you, Norm. Bob, just so you know, we're talking about the columns in front of the library. That's not entirely what this motion is about. This motion is also to do with attendance issues and any other issues that anyone has.
They must have a full committee at this point, right? Because what we are doing is impacting on getting quorums and all, because we will not be able to interview for 2-3 weeks.
Okay.
We'll do it as soon as we can, but there's posting and whatnot that has to go on.
Just recognize you make these appointments, you're going to live with them for 3 years, so.
Do you know?
I'm not comfortable with this. I haven't received any correspondence about attendance, and I don't feel it's right to single out one particular committee. We don't know what the attendance is, so to sit up here and make a vote without any background information and any documentation that a certain member has missed so many meetings, I don't think it's right for us to even consider it.
Well, I will say that we are being asked to reappoint committee for a 3-year term. Some questions have been brought up about a committee, and we have an interview committee for a reason, and we're being asked to re-interview and address those concerns. So we're going to vote on this. You can clearly vote no if you don't want to vote for it.
Okay. It's one particular of the whole list, so.
It's the only complaint we got.
I would say also it's fair for to provide the interview committee with the minutes of their meetings. They can see who was there or wasn't there.
Great.
If they're so inclined.
Okay,
May I?
you may.
I guess if we're going to be doing it for one committee, I think we should do it for all committees. I don't think that it's right to single out just one committee. If we're going to be looking at attendance, we should look at every single committee as the interview committee that we are. We should ask every single committee for minutes. And if there are people on this list that were not present for a certain number of meetings, then if the issue is attendance that we're really talking about, we can't just single out one committee. We'd have to do it for all.
Well, I don't think we singled out one committee. I think what I heard was that you had a complaint.
Where is it, though? Where's the complaint?
Right there.
It's for me.
It's from you
It's for me.
personally?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Okay? I have the right to complain, right?
So if we
Okay.
have,
You have the right to complain.
if we have a
You might
com-
also be careful because this may be a relative of yours, so,
Not at all.
you know,
Not at all. Are you saying it's Greg Winston?
that's one of them. I mean, you can read a list as well as I can. It's
Okay,
Craig
so
Well, there are two, so.
Okay.
and-
So the motion is to approve the FY17 committee reappointments with the exception of the Historic District Commission reappointments. And it is seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
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 Okay. So now we go back to the original motion, which is to approve FY17 committee reappointments. Anyone want to make a motion?
I make a motion that we approve the reappointments as presented.
Okay. Second? Any seconds?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Aye. It's a vote, 3-2.
Can I make a comment?
You
I
can.
think one of the things we should do, and we've been talking about doing, is going through, checking out those kinds of things. And in the future, we will go forward and do that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
One of the things that I think is very important that maybe we need to speak about tonight when we go over liaisons is that each liaison is presented by the chair of the committee with the minutes.
Okay,
And therefore, the liaison's job will then be to report back to the board what the attendance is, so that we don't run into this again.
Okay, we'll take that up when we get to that. Can I get a motion on G, Julie?
Mr. Chair, I move to request that we approve G,
Speak into the mic.
sorry. G, approve the application for weekday entertainment license for the Mad Minnow Bar and Kitchen at 554 Main Street, Route 28 in Harwichport.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion on this one? Peter?
Mr. Chairman, I found the application to be incomplete. Although they list their hours of operation, I don't think they actually tell us when they want to have the entertainment. I don't think they tell us, they talk about inside and outside. You know, does that mean they're going to have entertainment the entire time that they're open? I don't know if that's the case. I do know that in this particular establishment, as they've gone through the licensing process, which is, you know, we've had them here a few times and had to reschedule things. I think they're new to the process, and maybe they just didn't fill out the form. Maybe I'm reading it incorrectly, but I just think it needs a little bit more definition. I'm certainly in favor of it, but remember, if you will, that we had the abutters when the liquor license came up that were concerned about things. So, you know, times and day a week for entertainment, it's blank.
Okay.
You know.
Chris, did you have something on this? Did you?
I actually, we have had some problems. I do think it's a matter of just a newer applicant to the process. One of the things that I had recalled that we should have had in the package, so we could certainly put it in, is that it was my understanding that the businesses down in the Harwich Port area did have limitations on the live entertainment. So, you know, I was going to make this request that anything that is approved, that would be consistent with all the other establishments. There's no reason why someone would be open on a Friday night until 11 and someone else open until midnight. So I would think that if the board feels comfortable, we can certainly put that proviso on that whatever the other businesses have been approved for, that we would mirror that for this applicant. If the board would like to see the specifics of that, we can certainly bring it back for the 27th.
Charlene?
If I might, Chris was actually in a meeting when Ann Stidell came in to talk to me about this specific application. On the permit, on the license itself, she did include the hours of operation consistent with entertainment of all others in that area. So it would be noon until 10 p.m.
Okay. Angela?
Question, since we're fast approaching the season, which all the restaurants depend on, would it be appropriate to approve this depending on, or to include the timing that Ann has put in? So it can be approved, and as soon as that's put in, it could be signed, rather than having to wait several weeks to get it done.
Yeah, and just for the record, it is here on the license that it would be noontime to 10 p.m.
Okay.
Recorded or live music.
Janelle?
Peter did bring up the point of whether it would be outdoors or indoors, and is that pertinent information that we need to know before we sign this? Or could it also be a provisional in the way we do sign it, if we sign it?
I mean, certainly the board can approve with certain provisions on there, so we can certainly have whatever, if there's a specific differential between indoor versus outdoor, which I think it is, outdoor is more limited. Obviously, indoor, you can control the sound levels. But certainly, if the board voted it consistent with that, we'll make sure, and then we'll send it out to the board, so the board's fully aware of what we approved. But as the license here was presented to the board, and I think this should be incorporated into the motion, it is recorded or live music, and it's from 12 to 10 PM.
It's the pleasure of the board.
I would also, do they ask for outdoor? Or is it just live? I don't have that piece.
It says recorded or live. I believe the live is for outdoor.
Well, but it doesn't say outdoor on the application, does it?
No, it
So why
doesn't.
don't we approve it for indoor, which gives them a start, and outdoor is the place where we usually have difficulties. I mean, that's one option, or if everybody's in favor, do it both consistent with what is done in Harwichport. Either way.
Peter?
So this also excludes Sundays, by the way. Just, I mean, I don't know if that's important to them or not. It's a separate application and whatnot. But I just wanted to be complete so we don't get into a mess here, that's all.
Yep.
We don't want to slow them down. We just want to understand what it is their, what their intent is,
Yep.
if you will. And by the way, you may ask if anybody's here from that
Yeah,
organization.
is anyone here from Mad Minnow? No. Ed, you have a comment?
If my memory serves me correct, I'm pretty sure it does, the previous establishment in this space on their entertainment license was limited to indoor because of the residential use right next door to their outside patio.
So, it's the pleasure of the board. Peter?
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we approve the application by Mad Minnows for their weekday entertainment license for indoor application at this time, with hours of entertainment consistent with other establishments in Harwich.
In the area. Mhm.
Second.
It's okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Oh, the original motion.
The original, yes.
Can we who made the original motion?
Julie.
Julie, would you withdraw the original motion?
So I'm withdrawing the original motion.
And who seconded that?
Janelle.
Second.
Okay, she's removing the second. Thank you. Okay, under public hearings and presentations, we have Saquotucket Development Committee's request for public review and approval of the Saquotucket Landside concept plans. This was the plan that was voted on at town not the plan, but the funds for this plan were voted on at town meeting under Article 17 for $250,000 for the engineering of the landside plan for Saquotucket Harbor.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman and members of the board.
Matt
My
Hart.
Matt Hart, Chairman of the Saquotucket Development Committee. I'd like to thank the residents of the town of Harwich for their approval of the Saquotucket Marina construction and the Saquotucket landside design, and most important was the overwhelming support that we got in that vote. I'd also like to thank the Board of Selectmen for their support in their public review tonight of the Saquotucket Development Committee preliminary site plan so that we can move ahead with the Saquotucket land design and engineering bid. Some of you might remember this has gone on for 12 years. We've had 2 other committees and they got nowhere. About 2 years ago, the Board of Selectmen came up with an idea of a committee, and Peter came up with the idea of Saquotucket Development Committee. And it's consistent with what we wanted to do, but it also had representatives from different town departments and the public. We've had very interesting meetings. We covered a lot of details. There was a lot of misunderstanding. People couldn't understand why we couldn't put a shopping center there. It's a very fragile area, and the expression I use, if you look at the plan we're talking about, I think if we put another coat of paint on a building, we would be in violation because of setbacks and marshland and things like that. Just about every department in the town has contributed, but I particularly want to thank Bob in engineering. Paula was a big help. We also have the Conservation Commission, the Building Commission. Everybody has been very positive, working with us and working with the public. We've also had an enormous amount of interest from the public. Actually, it started mostly because everybody was trying to get rid of the Downey building, which was not much fun to look at. So it's been a very cooperative effort. What we've put together, we call a preliminary site plan. The Board of Selectmen's public review and approval of the preliminary site plan, they're necessary before the public bidding process for the design and engineering bid can take place. That bidding process would be based on incorporating recommendations from the general public, several town departments, the Harbor Master, and the Saquatucket Development Committee as are represented in this preliminary site plan. Our objective is to show the Board of Selectmen and the public the results of the Saquatucket Development Committee's efforts, and we can answer any questions you have, and then we hope you'll vote on moving ahead with the design and engineering bid to obtain the final Saquatucket landside site plan. I'd like to turn over the description of the details of this plan to Harbor Master John Rendon. Thank you.
Can I dim the lights a little bit so maybe we can see the screen a little better? Mr. Chairman, members of the board, John Rendon, Harbor Master. I'd like to go through, I have just a few slides that kind of will show you the site plan that we're presenting to you today. The main objectives of the plan are to improve the safety of pedestrian access, improve the efficiency of harbor operations, and enhance the character, beauty, and attractiveness of the harbor for boaters and non-boaters alike. Also, as we look forward, we want to ensure that we're accounting for resiliency towards rising tides and environment as we move forward with this plan. So that has also been taken into consideration. The plan includes a new harbor master office, a leased waterfront cafe restaurant, leased seasonal vendor shacks, a boardwalk with seating areas that overlook the marina. In addition, the former Downer property is part of this overall site plan, and we're looking to do some creative landscaping to enhance the appearance of the area and to add a new multi-purpose building that will serve as a consolidated ticket booth area for our passenger boats and a maintenance facility for our department, as well as some leased office spaces. In addition, a much-needed increase in vehicle parking spaces will be located there, approximately 80 spots. And in the winter, that same area will be utilized for winter boat storage. And then not part of this, but in conjunction with this, I know Town Administrator has submitted a request through Mass DOT to add a sidewalk leading from Saquatucket to, or leading from Harwich Port to Saquatucket, and that's an important piece of this plan as well. The Board of Selectmen charged us in the kind of the charter of our committee with several responsibilities, and I'll kind of try to cover those as I go through this various slide. The first of which was define marina problems which need to be resolved. Number one on my list is the safety of pedestrians that currently access Saquatucket Harbor. We have a ferry that operates 2-3 times a day. We got 3 other large passenger boats that draws a tremendous amount of people that currently line up to get their tickets in our parking lot where vehicles are going through, truck and trailer, or boat trailers are going through. Our ferry passengers get their tickets across 28 and then walk across to access the ferry. It's an accident waiting to happen in my mind. That is paramount in what we're looking at with our recommendation here. Another is parking shortage. Public access, specifically handicap accessibility, we're addressing here. And then efficiency of operation. As you know, we have our workshop over on Bank Street, and our world of work is at the harbor. And so I'm trying to bring that operation closer to our world of work. So those are the problems that, some of the problems that we currently see. What you see here is the larger scale. I got a couple of slides that takes it down a bit, but you know, that's the Downey property here. and that's the multi-purpose building that we're talking about putting, and the rest is the parking area. We'll talk about the conservation buffer zone lines, the wetlands, and the buffer zones that we have to consider in what we're doing here. This, of course, is the water with our bulkhead. We're talking about a boardwalk. We're talking about a cafe restaurant here and a new harbor master office here. So this is large scale. Downey property is 2.2 acres. Overall property is about 7 acres. If you can go to the next slide, please. So this shows you the conservation areas, and that was the second thing, second responsibility of the committee was to define conservation areas. That's the wetland delineation line. Coming off of that, the red line is our 50-foot buffer zone, which is do not encroach zone. And then this is the 100-foot buffer zone, where you have to have consideration of that, but it's not as restrictive as the 50-foot buffer zone. So this workshop, this consolidated multi-purpose building here, our garage, the workshop piece of this operation will be in the back part of the building, so it won't be seen by Route 28 or the houses across the street. The front part of the building will be the consolidated ticket booth area. It'll have an upstairs to that building is where some of the office spaces will be located that we could potentially lease. This is overall, we've had some drawings done, and I'll show one here later slide that just kind of shows the front of the building. We're looking to have a building that blends in with the community. It's not going to be a aluminum shed or anything like that. I mean, it's going to blend in with the community Cape Cod style structure. And it's about overall about a 5,000 square foot building up and down, with a large piece of that being the garage and the workshop. And the garage needs to be big enough to be able to put our boat in there to do maintenance throughout the year. Next slide, please. So this is the current Saquotucket side of what we're looking at. You'll see here the boardwalk goes the entire length of the bulkhead there, with some viewing areas. Those pieces that jet out will have benches and places for the public to view. We'll have a ramp system that goes down, a handicap accessible ramp system in this corner that will come down, and as you remember in our dock plan, our marina plan, waterside, this is where everybody will congregate that are going to be accessing the passenger boats. That's the corner, and we'll have the handicap ramp system coming down to load our 4 passenger boats there. So it flows well down the boardwalk, down this handicap ramp, short walkway across that front road to the handicap area. This here is an expanded green area. Currently behind our office we have a small little green grassy area. We're going to expand that so that we have a nice walkway that leads from the Downey property to the marina. And these are little vendor shacks that we're going to put out that we're proposing that we include, so that we get some of the local vendors to sell their baked goods or art or just local flavor to bring to Saquotucket Harbor. I think they'll be real popular. That's something that we've gotten some feedback from the public on. And then this will be a defined walkway path coming down in between these 2 buildings and joining up with the boardwalk area. This here is the cafe. We're looking to do a 52-seat capacity cafe that will serve breakfast, lunch, and late lunch, looking at 6 o'clock time frame, shutting it down. and we're not looking to do dinners or a late-night bar where a lot of activity is going to be going on. We're looking to bring a nice feel that not only supports our 200-plus boaters that have slips there, but to bring the non-boating public into Saquatucket to enjoy the jewel of Saquatucket. I mean, we have a beautiful view there, and it's I think it'll be a real nice thing. So, and then the Harbor Master office, we're trying to replace our old consolidated shack of an office that we currently have at Saquatucket, and that's been on our capital plan for many, many years, and we've kind of held off knowing that we were going to be looking at trying to do a bigger picture project here on the land side. So it's in desperate need of being replaced, and it's, again, not much bigger than the current footprint we have, but it will be 2 stories with some offices up in the second floor, and it'll serve our needs as we move forward. Next slide. So this is going to take a little bit to load here, but obviously one of the things that we need to address is septic system. We're adding a cafe restaurant that will require an expanded septic system. This is a little difficult to read, but working with Bob Caffarelli and Paula from the Board of Health, or from the health director, we've come up with a plan. Bob has come up with a plan that will certainly address the requirements for a 52-seat capacity cafe restaurant. And if I can just go through a couple things. This is our existing fast system that we currently have that feeds into these 2 leaching fields. That exists now. And it's working fine, it's working properly. Whether we decide to replace that and consolidate to a single one, that's a decision that certainly we can look at. This shows both the old plus what would require for the new septic system, which would feed the cafe. And this would be the proposed leaching field that would handle that cafe system with a series of tanks and treatment facilities to address the restaurant. And specifically, I even have a hard time reading mine here, but one has to be for grease trap coming out of the restaurant, and then of course the other for the restroom that will be located in the restaurant itself. So that hashed out area, if we choose to consolidate both operations and go to a single large septic type system, that is the area that would be required for the leaching field to handle both. So it can be done from a dimension standpoint within that west side of our lot. Next slide. So anyways, this is just again, we've had throughout our time different folks looking at potential designs. This is the north view, the street view of what the multi-purpose building would look like. Again, a nice design building that would blend in with the community, that would serve different purposes there at the Downey property. So that in a nutshell is the site plan. A couple of things just to mention. We've talked about the conservation areas. One of the things that we're going to have to do when we redo the Harbor Master office and the cafe, we'll have to push it to the north 5 to 10 feet to take into consideration the velocity zone, the 100-year type flood. As we're going through this process, CZM has indicated that we're going to have our current Harbor Master office is actually within that velocity zone. So that, again, looking forward is an important piece to consider as we move forward. I think I've answered most of the questions, the charges that you've asked of the committee. You asked us to explore opportunities. We did site visits at Plymouth Harbor, Quincy, Hingham, Situate Harbor. I've met with the restaurant owner and operator over at Bass River Marina Restaurant that currently runs an operation there, just to get a feel for how we would go about leasing it, or kind of things to consider as we move forward. So I think we've done some outreach, and of course, we've been doing public meetings since January of 2015 with a lot of input, great input from the public. So again, I think it's a good plan, and we're looking, if I can answer any questions, please let me know.
Thank you, John.
Sure.
Chris?
Mr. Chairman, could I just ask John if he or Bob, if they could comment on the $250,000 budget? What elements have we done already in-house, and what elements would we have to contract out? And then secondly, I think we have applied through the Conservation Commission agent for a grant, I believe in the total amount for the design. So
The actual amount comes out to about 187,000 plus, but it's because we have some type of match, and we're matching it with our services that we've already undertaken. So essentially, it would cover, the engineering design as much as we could for the grant. And that's a CZM resiliency grant that Amy has submitted, yes. As far as, I don't know, Bob, if you want to comment. I know Bob's done a ton of work as far as the septic system and the site plan itself. Obviously, some of the architectural design of the buildings we would probably go out on, but you want to comment, Bob?
Primarily, with all the buildings, the architectural design, I'm comfortable with the site plan, but the actual architectural design of a commercial building, we'd have to go out to bid for that because it's vertical construction. So we have to go out to bid for the architectures for all the buildings. And the architecture would be doing the construction supervision and certification that it was built in accordance to their design. So a lot of the money will go to the buildings. Oop, excuse me, Mike. But a lot of the site plan, I've done the preliminary site plan. As far as the topographic, I could do the proposed topography. There might be some elements where I would want to go out. If the design of the leach field is over 2,000 gallons per day, you have to do a hydrogeologic study of what is the mounding of the groundwater under the leach field. So that type of thing, I might go out for a hydrogeologic person. So there are, I think I could do most of it, but I feel comfortable with the $250,000 to supplement the things that I don't feel comfortable with.
Thank you. Okay, comments from the board? Peter?
John, do we have, or maybe Bob, do we have a rough idea, this is basically 3 buildings. Do we have a rough idea of construction costs split between the 3 buildings? I know you've been talking $2.5 million total, I think, is what if I remember the number right, for next year. For instance, is the cafe 300,000 or 2 million, or?
Yeah, I mean, it was, we've had discussions with Dave McQueen. I don't know if Dave's here. And a couple of contractors we've gone out to and tried to get an idea of, it is prevailing wage, it is commercial, and have, of course, had discussions with Bob, and, we were looking at 2.5 million. That's kind of how we came up. 10% of that is how we came up with engineering design costs. So, $2.5 to $3 million, I think we're within that range. And obviously, as we get further along in the engineering design, those numbers will get firmed up a bit. But, take, for example, the multipurpose building. A big portion of that is just an open bay area. So it's a little difficult to just put a, $350 per square foot cost at the entire 3 buildings. So I think we're in that range.
Peter?
If I could follow up, the risk I see in this, and,
Sure.
you know, I fully support the plan, but I think the risk is the cafe. And that is because, you know, I think our experience, say at the golf course, in leasing the facility, having to fix ovens or whatever, you know, that kind of stuff, and having different tenants in and out, hasn't been great. Now, that's an isolated sort of facility. You gotta work your way in there. Here you've got one right on the water, which you'd assume someone would wanna lease and, you know, take advantage of. Can I assume that you'd be looking for having a liquor license there, I'm guessing,
Yes.
in some sort of bar? Is it,
I think a liquor license, whether it's a bar or just, you know, being able to sit out and have a beer or a glass of wine on the, you know, on the outdoor seating, I don't know yet,
Yeah.
but yes, a
and
liquor
I-
license.
And I think as we think about this,
Sure.
because I think it's important, if we're gonna have a cafe, to make it successful. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's gotta be successful, but I also think that whoever leases it, I'm just making this up, over a 10-year period of time, has to make lease payments sort of that would recover the cost of that building and the septic upgrades, for instance. It's just a parameter I'd throw out there. So you can back into what that kind of number is and see if that makes any sense to somebody to run a restaurant. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
My other question is, let's just say that after 5, 6 years, the restaurant thing wasn't working for whatever reason. We didn't get enough people going through, it was the wrong operator, nobody cares about it, nobody wants it. Is there an alternative use for that building that could be, you know, advantageous for the harbor, I guess? You know, whether it's, I don't know, shellfish lab moving there or whatever it is, I don't know. I just give that some thought. I'm not putting you on the spot tonight.
Sure.
But I
No,
just think we need to be prepared
Yeah.
to be able to say, hey, if the restaurant cafe thing doesn't work out, then we could use it for this, you know?
Yeah. Okay. Yes, sir.
Julie?
Oh, no,
Mr.
go ahead.
Chairman, Peter, you were involved in this, so was I. One of the problems with the golf course is the septic system.
Yeah, I understand.
And that limited how many people they could have there and when they could use it. That was one of the reasons, we were talking with Paula, we didn't want that restriction. The other thing is, we didn't talk about it very much, but the restaurant is a single-story square building. It could be subdivided if you want to use it for something else. We've had people contact us. We didn't even think of this in the beginning when we were building the building for the technical. People want to lease office space there that are part of their boat. They're either brokers or they're in fishing. So we're staying in the scope of for harbor use. But as people find out more and more about this, we're still trying to be flexible.
Yeah.
So I'm very confident that it'll work there. And we're trying to do it in such a way that we don't want to be competitive, directly competitive to others. But right now, if you're on one of those boats, only thing you can buy down there is a bag of ice. And you can't get to any place where you can get a cup of coffee. You can't get a loaf of bread. You've got a lot of people that just like to go down there now, and they park their car and they bring their dinners with them, sandwiches and things like that. So it's catering to the boaters, transient boaters, and even the commercial boaters. A lot of people will be grabbing sandwiches and lunches as they're going on the ferry and coming back. And we think it's going to be a large draw for people who just want to sit down there and either have a glass of wine or just want to, with their kids down there. As he said, the main thing that was a fear to us is kids getting hurt down there. So what we've done is found a way to funnel the people on the boardwalk and from the parking lot and keep the activities on that side of the parking lot. And that's why if you look on that boardwalk, there are like patios, so that they're fenced so the kids and anybody else in a wheelchair or anything else could go there and use the facilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Julie?
Hi, I just have a couple questions on the septic system. What would be the determining factor in deciding whether to go with an improved consolidated system versus the current system?
Really, the determining factor is interpretation of state and local code. For me, there's a financial advantage to keep them both separate, a number of reasons to keep them both separate. But if the interpretation of the Board of Health is what they say, how they interpret the rules and laws is the way we would have to go.
Okay.
So if they interpret the local and state code as that we have to combine all the systems, then we will have to combine the
Do it.
systems.
And is there a dollar cost in terms of,
It'll be double, at least double the cost. Because the flow for the cafeteria is 1,800 gallons per day. The flow for the restrooms, the current facility, is roughly 1,900 gallons per day. So we would have to build a system of double the flow than we would have to build if it was just for the cafeteria.
thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Peter?
I just ask either Bob or John, based on where we are today and having funding available for the design July 1st, when do you expect to have a bid package in place, design complete bid package in place, and then bids, so we have something to deal with at the next town meeting, if you will?
I think we can put the bid package together once we get approval to move forward with what we're proposing. Certainly within a couple of months, we'll have it out and on the street. So, my goal is to jump on it as soon as we know whether we can move forward. So, and certainly by next town meeting, we'll have the engineering design done, and the actual cost we'll know, construction costs we'll know firm.
Thank you, John. Janelle?
I just wanted to say I think it's great, and I'm really excited about the vendor shacks. That's a new addition since the last time you were in here. And I love the Hyannis Harbor vendor shacks. It's really fun to, even if you're not going on a boat or anything, just to kind of go see the art, and I like that.
That's the idea. Yeah, thank you.
Chris?
Mr. Chairman, I do want to point out, I think it's been a great partnership working with the waterways and with John, and the approach that we took on the water side was to really pursue a funding mechanism that was kind of a 75-25. And I think the electorate, based upon the vote tabulation that we got, was I think in the same mindset. And I think that we're still kind of early in the stages, but I think that we'll pursue that same approach of how do we take some of these concepts and have it so it will be some revenue enhancement to offset some of the debt service charges. So I just want the board to know, I thought we were successful last time with that strategy, and I think that's the same strategy that we should employ this time. And we'll have to see as we go how close we can come to 75-25, or if we can, exceed that a little bit.
Thank you, Chris. Julie?
I just wanted to ask another question. I concur too. I think it's a fabulous setup.
Thank you.
But with all of the buildings in the velocity zone, or is it only?
It would just be, currently our Harbor Master building is within there.
Okay.
So when we rebuild the Harbor Master building, we'll move it back anywhere between 5 or 8 feet. And when we put the restaurant in, we'll do the same. So they'll both be out of that velocity zone.
Oh, great. So they'll be out of the velocity.
That's correct.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great.
And the impact on that, from my perspective, really is we may lose a little bit of parking because we're going to have to push it a little bit further away from the, from the Rosa Rugosa line there into the parking area a bit.
But then again, you'll save a lot of money at not having to make things hurricane-proof.
That's correct. We'll be meeting the standard. Yes, looking forward.
Great. Matt?
Yes, thank you. On the restaurant, the building has to be moved back. But what that does, as long as the concrete patio isn't touching the building, it can extend toward the harbor, which is what we wanted in the first place.
Great, okay.
Any other comments from the board? Any comment, Peter?
No good.
Any comments from the public? State your name for the record.
Good evening. My name is Charlie Hellowell. I live at 182 Gorham Road. Can you go back to the first slide? Okay. See that little corner that's right to the north, a little bit to the northeast of the new building?
Charlie,
That's,
use that pointer. That
oh,
little
okay.
button, that'll help you.
Which is the
red button.
Okay. My property comes right out to there. We live in the house right over there. We bought the house in 1980, and we've lived with the Downey property ever since then. And it's gone from good times to bad times. Actually, we came down here, started on the Cape as summer folks in 1964, when that used to be Alpane's restaurant and a gas station. And as I look around. Number one, I want to commend the town for doing an outstanding job with the planning and development of this. And yes, there is self-interest in that, but you've done a wonderful job. And I just want to sort of point out a little bit of history. I went over, any of you looked at the plaque that's in the entrance to the driveway? What you're going to see there are the names of citizens of Harwich who back in 1967, there was no Saquatucket Harbor. And this group of Waterways Committee's men, and I think it was about 2 years' worth of boards, but let me just mention a few names. And I knew some of them, maybe you knew more of them, I hope so, but one was Richard Wales, Russ Morgan, don't know whether you remember the House of Morgan, but that was his wife's shop. Sam Arsenault, Bill Thompson Jr., I think they had a big role in owning the Clam Bar. Stanley Barnes, Leland McKinney, Sheldon Thayer, Harold Van Buren, Roop Nichols, I think everybody here still knows who Roop was, Wallace Renio, and finally Lawrence F. Nickerson Jr. These were gentlemen way back then that had the foresight and the idea to get some dredging done there. In today's environment, it never would have happened, as you can well imagine. And there's still some people today that resent the fact that we've destroyed a nice estuary and whatnot. But what it created, I think, was really a gem of a thing for Harwich. And it really has added to the boating industry, to the summer home residents, the second home residents. And I am so delighted to see things moving forward, and again, from a self-interest point of view. But I think this plan and the fact that it's kind of generated from within has really an opportunity to make this harbor really a gem on Cape Cod. As you're in your travels, go around and look in on some municipal harbors. They're municipal harbors. They're kind of industrial. There's all sorts of things. But this one, with this concept, really has the potential to be a jewel. So I wish you all luck in the future, and we will be here to support you as best we can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Richard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Everything's been really positive, and I am not as positive. And Matt knows that because I wasn't positive initially on the waterside development, but I turned around. Okay. I'm curious about the maintenance facility. I know it's on the harbor, and I know that harbor master currently has his maintenance activities, but the town was consolidating, I thought, maintenance activities, and I'd like somehow that to be addressed, of whether we're consolidating or we're not. And I'm not sure just what's involved in this maintenance facility concerning a large fiberglass boat that the harbor master has to have, but it seems to me that other harbors can probably take that to a facility that can handle it if you really need the maintenance. Why are we having a specialized facility there? Now that's question number one. Green space. I mean, we talked about people going down there with sandwiches. I used to do that too. That was before even before that, I'd walk out on the docks when they weren't busy, and I'd go out there with my family and eat my lunch out there and eat my dinner out there. Now they've got gates and all that, you can't do it. But anyway, I don't see enough green space. And if the harbor I'm familiar with is Sag Harbor up in Long Island. Big, huge green space right at the harbor. The shack of the harbor master is off to one side. He can still see all the docks. Just a thought, I don't see enough green space. The parking, you've got trailer space going up against the green area at the top. I don't even know if I can point this, so I won't bother. But why is the parking lines, is that just for rendition, or why are they longer on the right-hand side middle? Who's parking there? Trailers. Who's parking behind that area? More trailers? They don't look like the same length, and I was just curious why it... Anyway, I would love to see more green space on the right-hand side. I think I want to echo Peter's comments about the viability of a restaurant and the payback period for a restaurant, and why we're building one for the town resources that competes directly with Brack's right beside it. Thank you.
Thank you. John?
Yes, sir. The first question was maintenance. Well, we have 4 boats. We have hundreds of buoys. We have a lot of equipment that we, building floats, maintaining floats, I mean, we are a maintenance department, and yes, we're consolidating facility maintenance, but we're not consolidating mechanical maintenance on our boats and maintaining our buoys and cutting chain, and I mean, that's a lot of what we currently do. I would say I am attempting to downsize my current operation. I have this huge old fire station that is filled with stuff that half of it isn't even the department's, and I don't need that much space. So I am trying to downsize our maintenance operation and get it closer to where our world of work is, and I would hope that the town would look to sell that property and, you know, take advantage of those funds to help us build what we need at the harbor. So that's the maintenance piece. The green space, I mean, we can have that discussion. That east side of Saquatucket parking is a state public access facility lot. And if we do anything with that side of the property, we have to get permission from the state because we received funding several years back before my time to help us build that ramp that's one of the best ramps in the state, frankly. And that part of the lot is controlled by the state. So if we were to take away boat trailer parking, the state might have something to say about that. And what was the third point, sir? Sorry. And
building of a restaurant that's right next to an existing privately owned restaurant.
yeah.
Why would the town want to do that?
The question is building a restaurant that would compete with a local restaurant.
Yeah. I don't think we're competing. We're a different operation. I think there's a real need. Like Matt said, you can get a bag of ice, but you can't get a soda, you can't get a bottle of water, you can't get a sandwich to go, you can't get a cup of coffee. We're talking breakfast, lunch, not a late dinner type operation. Brax does great, and we're supportive of them. They certainly use a lot of our parking area to support their operations, but I'm not sure they got a monopoly on that whole place. I think what we're recommending is not in direct competition with that facility.
We'd be leasing this anyway,
That's
so it would
correct.
be another.
That's
Great.
correct.
Thank you. Peter?
I'd also point out, I mean, even though I think there's a risk in the cafe, that when Thompson's Farm Market was across the street and you could get a sandwich or you could pick up things, you know, whether it's breakfast or lunch, you would see people going on the ferry and whatnot, making their first stop there and then coming across the street. I mean, droves.
Sure.
So it has a good chance to happen. It's just a matter, I think, on how you do it and maybe how you advertise it, who runs it, et cetera, et cetera. But I think, I do agree the need's there, and I do agree it's different than Brax. Brax is serving, you know, cooked food for dinner and lunch and whatnot. As you stated, it's more breakfast and lunch and grab and go kind of stuff than, and hopefully someone wants to sit there and have a cocktail or two and just look out and see what's going on in the harbor.
Absolutely.
You know, it's that kind of thing. I guess I would ask, though, you know, at some point in time, we'll probably need to have a discussion, not now, but later, just about, you know, you did mention Brax uses the parking lot and da-da-da-da-da. You know, is there some consideration going forward about doing something, or getting some recognition from that, or eliminating it, or whatever? I mean, it's a discussion. You know, we're building a harbor for boats and boaters, quite frankly, not to extend parking for, you know, a restaurant, so.
Matt Hart?
Yeah, thank you. You just reminded me of something. Harwich has a unique feature that most people don't understand. All three of our harbors are handicap accessible when this is completed. They can go to the boats, they can go to the passenger boats. You helped us, along with the town, make Allen Harbor that way. Witchmere Harbor is that way, and we hope that this harbor will be that way. It means anybody could go down the docks, they can get on the boats, and there's easily access to parking for them.
Thank you, Matt. Jenny?
Hi, Jenny Hewitt, speaking just as a resident. I really like this. I know we've talked about the cafe and how useful that will be for boaters. I think for the general public to come, I think that's great. I grew up going to Oak Bluffs or Martha's Vineyard in the summer, and, you know, you can walk all along the harbor. We don't have that same accessibility, not in the ADA sense, but just you can't drive along and see, I mean, there's one overlook, but I just haven't felt that connection with the harbor, and I think that's part of what this will attract people to come there. And I've seen it at a lot of other locations too, and it's something I think we've been missing. Speaking as a department head, Barbara Ann is a witness that if the cafe doesn't work out, I've already called dibs that the library director's office could be moved to that location.
Thank you. Peter?
I just want to remind everybody, a key piece to make this all work, and I think make it work for the business community as well as the general public, and that is the tying in or building of a sidewalk from here back into Harwich Port. And if I recall correctly, we do have the commitment from the state that says the next time they have to do work, you know, repaving 28 in that area, that they will undertake a sidewalk project. So, you know, as we move this forward, I think it would be appropriate to remind the state of that and maybe send them and keep them informed of this design, the right people within DOT or whatever, and see if we can't get that pushed up a little bit, because I think that ties it all together, quite frankly, you know. It's not an easy thing to do. I mean, when you go there and look, and there's poles and trees and whatever, but for people to be able to walk from there into Harwich Port, I think is a huge attraction.
Mr. Chairman, Peter, you bring up another point. Charlie, you still here? Yeah. The question is if we could get that sidewalk to go a little bit further up, you'd have a bike path almost right to the beaches.
We'll work on that as we go forward. Yeah.
It provides walking connection to Red River Beach.
Great. Any more comments?
If no more comments, I'd like to make a motion. Permissible. I move that we accept the preliminary site plan for the landside portion of Saquatucket Harbor that has been as presented, and support moving forward towards the construction phase.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and accepted to approve the request to move forward with the concept plan. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It's a vote. Thank you, John. Thank you, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to old business. We are, topic A is the middle school interim use. Last week, we discussed the potential of replacing the heating and what uses are going on in the middle school now, so we are going to continue that conversation. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess there's two parts to this that I would like to kind of bring up. One is not necessarily directly for me, but more for the board. Obviously, administration will support whatever direction the board moves in. But obviously, I think the intent was at the 2016 annual town meeting was to try to derive a intent as to where to move forward. I did in the memo here include some information in regards to the votes, just to give a flavor for how the electorate, I know it was non-binding, but certainly it gives the board something to work with in terms of what the intent of the voters are. I would group them in kind of two areas. One was the sale of the affordable, sale of the building for affordable senior housing. That received the most votes, and that's something that obviously we've done an RFP already, so that would be something that wouldn't be too much for staff to put together, although the main person doing that was Dave Spitz, who is leaving us. So, but we have a template to work from. The second, which I think option 4 and option 1, revolve around the town retaining some use. And if you combine those two elements, although the town hall did receive a lesser amount, but the community center or a cultural center received, some real significant votes. So I think that there's kind of two groupings that are in there. And what I wanted to at least put out in terms of, if the board wants to go in a specific direction, in terms of having it as a cultural center, I think there's going to be some due diligence that would have to be done to see, how do we make that into a community center, a cultural center, and how much do we have to put into it to get it to that situation. But also the votes were a little bit split. I don't think there was necessarily a definitive real, truly definitive number one. So in terms of that, I thought about kind of my experience, and I've been in one town where we had a middle school, and I was authorized to dispose of it. I had another community in which the community had a school building that it was retained, and it was actually retained for, I believe, about 10 to 15 years, because they weren't sure what they wanted to do with it, and they had a interim use, and they actually used it as a kind of an artist colony, if you would. And then 10 years or 15 years later, they figured, oh, well, we have a use now. So they took it back from being originally a school to a kind of a leased use, to then back to a town use. So I wanted to, at least in this memo, to come up and at least offer to the board that there may be another option, which would be to do a continued interim use. And I have in here, I did include some of the work of the last committee, so the board has that. I did also put in some of the costs that it has cost us to operate. So I have elements. The one thing I guess I would specifically point out is if we're gonna have an interim use, I would like to have like a 5-year time horizon. The one real issue that we've had is if the board wants to hold off and see if there's validity to having a cultural center, then we would take that 5-year period. And I want to applaud really Eric and Carolyn, who have made use of that building to kind of keep it going. But they've also made use of the building with the understanding that anybody that goes in and uses it has been told short term, because the board doesn't know what we want to do. And I don't think that, how we've been using it currently is a true reflection of what the potential is for that building. So if there was going to be a sense or an interest in retaining it, to then, hold it for a little bit, I would like to, and I did have a meeting with Carolyn and with Eric to go through kind of what the recommendation would be and to move forward. The second part to that, if we were to pursue the interim plan, is I think that we've kind of taken a wait and see with the building, and we haven't done much maintenance. This year in FY16, it was put into the operating budget. So I can't just hold that money in perpetuity. It has to have an intended reason for why we would hold it. So I can encumber money, and then that encumbrances last a certain period of time to do some work. So I did have a discussion also with Sean Libby, and I said, what would be some of the key things that you'd like to see? It does appear that in this year's budget, we'll have about $50,000 that will be left in that account. So what would he want to use in terms of prioritization? And his prioritization was to do what we could do to remove the 2 modular office trailers that were attached by the school, the 2 modulars. I know when Monomoy was constructed over here on Oak Street that they did not have any real success getting any money for it. So I think it would be more just a disconnect because it doesn't really fit in. It has water that goes in, a sprinkler system that's potentially different from other parts of the building. So to separate that off, I don't see that as a downside. And the second, would be to do the hot water system. Currently, it's only cold water that goes in. We had leaks in it. And what I've been saying very carefully, certainly my time here, is we've been doing minimal maintenance and minimal heating. So we have not taken active role in making sure that that building is good. I wanted to make sure that we keep the mold down and we keep the building as an asset, so when it is, or if it is ever sold off, that we want to keep it in a situation in which it's going to be viable. So to that end, we have done some minimal heat. So I would like to give Sean the opportunity prior to June 30th to kind of go through and see what else needs to be done, give him the opportunity to encumber that. I would say, and again, I guess you're always a victim of your own experiences, but when I was trying to sell a middle school in another community, they did the purchase and sale after I left, and it was for senior housing. And in that circumstance, the contractor said that they didn't really need much left. They said that the heating system could kind of go to pot. Some of the other systems could go to pot because they were basically going to gut it and redo all the plumbing and electrical type work. So, I think in terms of, it's still viable in the current situation that it is for housing, knowing that in kind of background. But I think if we were to ramp up and use some of the areas and some of the classrooms as cultural areas, renting out space or doing license agreements, similar to what we've done on the Albro House. And Albro House, we targeted professionals that were related to mental health issues. I think in this case, in order to avoid, I think the community center does an outstanding job, and we don't need to duplicate that. But I think in the community center, where we have overflow needs, such as in recreation, and certainly the auditorium at that building offers a unique element that we don't have in the community center. So I think that there are some things that we would want to pursue, to work with Sean Libby to find out what elements he would do to try to bring that up, and have a minimal maintenance, keep that, or maybe a little better maintenance standard, but not pump in the kind of money that was being looked at if we were to relocate Town Hall. Not try to spend the $15 million until there's some better understanding as to what is viable. But I do think that it does deserve some discussion as to what direction the board wants to go. If the building were to be put out to RFP, we'd still have to go for sale for the use as a housing. We'd still have to wait to town meeting, because it would have to be rezoned, presumably rezoned, and the sale of the building itself would have to be approved by town meeting. So there is a timeline to go into the sale. But certainly, if administration is going to think, do we hold the building for an additional year, or do we hold it for an additional 5 years, it would be a different approach in either respect.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Thank you for all that hard work and information in the package.
Thank you.
Comments from the board? Peter?
It's still not clear to me what the annual cost of keeping this thing going is. It's not, I see you've got the accounts here and whatnot. I don't happen to see the insurance number in here, but, I'm assuming you can rack up all those numbers so we know what it is. As it is today, what it costs.
Yeah, that's a good point. I can get the insurance number for you. That would be a separate, I think we do have an accounting. We paid that out of the insurance line item, so it was
I know,
paid out
but
of a
it's still a
different line
cost.
item.
I mean,
Yep.
so it's a cost. So I'd like to see the full, including all these, line items in the accounts here, a full up cost of what it is, and by the way, break it down like, gas, electric, insurance, water, just so we know what those items are, okay? I also think that, if I look at, without delving too deeply into it, but, we had the non-binding ballot question. The thing about the cultural center, if you will, was focused on the question asked about a self-sustaining private organization to run the cultural center, not the town running a cultural center. So I think if those entities are out there that want to use it as a cultural center, I'd like to see them come forward and talk to us about it, because I don't know what that is. I don't. But, I know there's some folks in preparation of this that at least put the idea out there of having a private organization have a cultural center there. But we need to get some meat on the bones if we're going to head in a direction like that. And I don't know if there's any entity out there or not. I don't know, but it'd be nice to see if they're there, Excuse me, the other thing I would just say is, as far as housing goes, I think the biggest, okay, we didn't get a lot of votes in total, but that had the most votes, if you will. I do think that we could craft a trial RFP, not focus on 40B, but just someone who wants to make it in the housing, whether it's condos or whatever, and get away from that, super high density, who are the people coming to live there kind of thing. Are they from town or not from town, or, where are they coming from? May make some sense, I don't know.
Janelle?
So as the liaison to the rec department, I asked Eric for some concrete numbers about usage over this last year when the rec department did start utilizing the gym. And he did forward me some numbers, which I'm glad to share with you. In total, the revolving fund for the rec department received $13,375 with the limited use that they did have. We saw the schedule in our packet, but there's also some more detailed, and like I said, I'd be glad to email all of you this. I think that's significant with the limited amount of use that they did generate over there, I think that that is really good money. And it will help offset some of the costs that we will incur for both maintenance and upkeep. And what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, the other thing I was going to say was we did have a number of nonprofit organizations over the last two middle school repurpose committees that are interested in space there, to rent space. So I think it's very important that we reconnect with them and also maybe put it out there again for new nonprofits that may be interested. So as far as the cultural center is concerned, they will be able to present their ideas.
Thank you. Angelo?
I think that it's interesting that the first two items are the ones that cost the least. The first two that were voted on, the sale for senior housing and the use for as cultural, the income shown was positive, basically. And I think that's important because I don't think that the town is really happy to spend a lot of money in that project, but would like to see something done. I think Peter's request to put all the costs in, so we know what the annual cost of maintaining that building, in its current form anyway, would be is important. Because I think what we need is a plan. And if we can, if the rec department knows that the gym costs X and the auditorium costs Y, and we could work out covering the costs for that, that's a big step to it. I don't, $13,000 is great if it costs us $4,000 in electricity, but if it's $80,000 in electricity, it's not so good. I think we also have been working with some people who are interested in cultural activities, and we should get their plan and their thoughts involved. And then I think we do need to eventually, when we have an idea of a plan, move forward to putting it in effect and probably covering 4 or 5 years. But I don't think we should do that until we have a plan. And it may take us 6 months or so to get the plan together. But I don't think until we see what are the options and how to do it, I think, putting the hot water in, for example, unless it's to save the building, is not necessary. But we need to know how much the costs are so we can move forward with it. And I think there are plans that can be made, and the rec department and whatnot can figure out how they would use it and what they would generate. And then we would know at least one step. And the same thing with the cultural people. How much would they rent things for? What would they suggest? And I don't mean a 400-page plan. I mean some ideas and some theories, because we really don't have anything very specific in that area.
Peter?
I think on the hot water thing, I think that if you're gonna have people use the building, I think they have to be able to have hot water, at least in the bathrooms. Not that they're gonna take a shower there, but at least have them in the bathrooms for sanitary purposes. So I don't disagree with doing that. It's not like providing hot water throughout the building. I'm assuming it's just in those areas.
One of the things we're looking at is maybe not do the entire system, but do the instant hot water that goes underneath the sink. That way, as sections of the building come online, we'd have the ability to address that.
Yeah, but I also think that, and to build on what Angela was saying, I think the intent here is that if we keep this building and people want to use it, and whether we call it a cultural center or a civic center, whatever it is, that it be self-sustaining. So to that end, I think we need to get our estimates or best information we have as to what it actually costs to operate the building. Divide it up, whether you do it on a square foot basis or per, activity room or whatever, to be able to say to someone who might lease a room or the auditorium, whatever, this is what it costs if you're gonna rent it by the month or the day or whatever. And maybe those numbers are not, good. I don't know. Maybe it's something that wouldn't make it attractive. But it's meant to be, in my mind, something that's self-sustaining. The only way to get to that is the full costs have to be recovered. Not of putting the building together, but of just operating the building.
Barbara Ann?
Couple of things. The first is that one of the first choices, obviously, as we know, is housing. And I just want to remind viewers and all of you folks that in this particular town at this particular time, we have a 4 to 6 year waiting list for seniors. We only have Pine Oaks in this town right now for quote-unquote distinctive senior housing. The second point is, it sounds great to have a cultural center, and it's been compared, I've been hearing all week, to the one in Yarmouth. The one in Yarmouth is run by a director and an assistant director who are paid quite handsomely, I might add. A gorgeous setting, brand new addition. It's like apples and elephants. I mean, we're not even remotely close to each other. There's a lot of costs that you have to talk about besides the mold issue and water issue and other issues. You've got custodian, you've got security. Who's going to clean that building? It's a huge building. You're only going to clean like 2 classrooms because 2 are used. If you're doing, if you're going to have a cultural center and classrooms are going to be rented out, for example, are we now landlords? And who sets that rate and how does that get done? And then if they're using it, is it going to be like the community center? I've also been hearing it called a cultural community center. Please don't use the word community center. We have a community center in Harwich that's working beautifully, and I don't want it compared or confused. But I think before we become landlords, as Peter said, I think you need an entity that would be doing all of this work, such as they have in Yarmouth, rather than saying the town of Harwich is going to be landlords and doing a rent by room basis. And the last thing is with the unforeseeable flood that we had in our building, it is something also that you have to consider when you're talking about a little bit of an older building. If you have a cultural center and you have artist John Smith and has beautiful paintings and he's got something in the works, and then suddenly you have a pipe burst and it ruins all of his artwork, is our insurance going to cover all that and for all of the artists? And how, I mean, it was a pretty big flood that we had, and it wasn't something we expected. So it sounds wonderful in theory, but it really needs a lot of work and it really needs a concrete plan, just my opinion.
Thank you. State your name for the record.
Sharon Flieger, resident. Being relatively new to the processes here, I have a question. What was the purpose of asking those non-binding questions and you get a result, and now it seems to me like you're right back where you started from, just discussing the same issues. So what was the purpose for that non-binding question if you're not taking the recommendation of the one that received the highest? And I'm asking that as a matter of clarification.
So my sense on that is we were looking for further direction. The other piece of this is we've had 2 middle school repurpose committees. So one ran for a year, and they came up with, at the very end, one housing option that didn't go over very well, and the selectmen chose not to pursue that. Then they started another middle school repurpose committee, and that one deliberated for another year. And in full disclosure, I was on that. And the recommendation that came out of that was housing was the last option for that location, and we only received one response on housing on that round. So far we've had 2 housing responses. We also had a petition that was put together that went before town meeting last year, and didn't go anywhere. It didn't pass to save the middle school. So there's been a lot of input, and we were looking for, my opinion is we were looking for more input. It looked like about 14% of the voters voted in this election, and I don't think that there was I personally don't think there was an overwhelming response to any of the options. And that we need to continue to explore. This is a very important asset to the town of Harwich. It's a 79,000 square foot building that the town has valued at about $12 million. It's 7 acres of land, and I believe the first option from Stratford Capital and the first middle school repurpose committee was for about $650,000, and they wanted to put 65 units of housing in. The second middle school repurpose committee had a informal inquiry into the housing option. It never went to full offer. So no money came out of that, and that was for about a 40-unit senior housing development. But it was a private organization, and only a certain amount of the units could have been affordable. Talking about Barbara, in response to Barbara Ann Foley's comment, housing, senior housing is an issue in town. How much senior housing are we going to get in that building if we do a 40B project, which we have to fall under 40B guidelines? How many Harwich residents are going to be able to be in that building? And that was a question of the last middle school repurpose committee. So this is a very important town asset. It's a big piece of land. There was a lot of concerns about putting any sort of housing next to an elementary school. That property was built as a school complex and then continued to be added onto as a school complex. The elementary school accesses its pickup through that middle school parking lot. So there's a lot of issues.
So if the Board of Selectmen has an idea of where they would like to go with this, like what they would like to do with it, what is the holdup in getting it done?
I don't think that we have a clear idea what we want to do with it.
Okay. All right.
What we have right now is an interim use, and I think with the work that the town administrator did in the last couple weeks on this and the information that he put in our package was kind of to expand on the interim use until an actual decision was made on what to do with that property. And it is not a community center, as another response to Barbara Ann Foley's. It would at very most be an extension of the one that we already have that runs great. But it would be a separate facility. Chris, as mentioned, had met with Carolyn and Eric Beebe, the recreation director, and came up with some concepts in here. So
I'd had some people mention to me, why, when they had a majority vote in the one direction, why it didn't move forward. And that question, and then I looked at it myself and I wasn't sure, other than it was non-binding. But I didn't know what exactly the board is looking at to do. And then when I sit and listen to it, I don't get any real clear idea of what anyone as a group would like to do with this. It seems like there's just this hodgepodge of ideas.
yeah, it is a hodgepodge of ideas, and it's
Okay.
a very important decision for the town of Harwich and a very important decision by the Board of Selectmen. Peter had his hand up first, so go.
Oh, I'm just guessing, and we haven't individually said, yes, I'm in favor of this, whatever, but I'm guessing you'd find the board is all over the place on this one. I'm just guessing. I also think that whatever will become of that building is gonna have to go to a town meeting vote of some sort, okay? And I also think that that's not gonna happen in the very near future. So this is gonna, I won't say it's an albatross around our neck, but it's something that we're gonna have to deal with for the next at least several years, I think, before it gets dispositioned. And quite frankly, it could be that no one agrees on anything, and the option that got the least amount of votes, which is tear it down and make a park, basically, could end up being the only one that, people can get behind in the end. I just don't know.
All right.
I don't know. So, but I think there'll be lots of discussion and interest in this over the next several years, I think.
Okay. Julie? Do you want to defer to Angelo first? Angelo?
While she's choking, very good question, and I think Peter's answered part of it. We basically can't get a final decision until next May's meeting. What I propose is that we take a quick look at the cultural possibility with the tie-in of rec to see if we can cover the costs of that operation and perhaps make a few dollars for the town. If we can do that, then that gives us 2 RFPs we could go out and get some information on, one the housing and one this one. And whether we take both of them to town meeting, let the town decide, or whether we just select one. I would like to see this done soon, and if both of them failed, maybe we do end up down with option 4. But I don't think we should try and do it for the next 5 years. I think if we were to do something for the next 5 years, we put the minimum use in that building that we can to cover the insurance issue that we have, and stop. But because if we keep on adding basketball to the pickleball and this, and all of a sudden, we're gonna have this huge operation there, and you own it. And you can't do that. That's why you have to find out what the plan is. If it makes sense to do that, let's do it. And I think the answer, by the way, is our thought is the cultural center would operate the way the Yarmouth one did, with an outside party handling it, probably through a lease or something like that. But I don't know if that even is going to exist.
So then the process going forward is basically for the board to come up with one or two ideas on what you would like to do, and then it would be presented as a actual vote at a town meeting? In other words, not a non-binding, but a...
Oh, it would be an article at the town meeting, and and most probably on the ballot, I would guess.
All
It would
right.
be on both,
All right,
I would guess, right?
all right, thank you.
Back to Julie.
Excuse me for
Don't
joking. I also, I'm new to the board, and so, I found, I have to be honest, when looking at the questions on election day, I found some of them to be a little bit hard to decipher one from the other, and I don't mean any offense to anyone who created the questions, but I did really have to sort of go through them and go through them again and again, and I was well aware, but in trying to pick my choice. So I think personally, I would like to see it that we could streamline it a little bit better and make it clearer decision, say 1, 2, 3, or 1 through 5, whatever we came up with. But I also think that there's another piece that could be explored a little bit more, and I'm not in favor of leaving the building idle. I think that any kind of use that it can get in terms of the extended rec use and any other type of use, and maybe we'll have other even towns who want to use our space as everybody's fighting for space for leagues and everything else, as I understand it. And I think it's important to, get the hot water on and have the building, keep it functioning. We don't want to lose the value of it. So I also think that there's some other, going back to its original use of being educational, I think that there could be an educational use there still, because we have a lot of people working hard to try to get mandatory preschool. So you've got that going on. I'm going to attend a meeting about that tomorrow, actually. In addition to that, I've heard rumblings about the tech, who's dealing with issues of their building, and possibly looking at ways that they could maybe use some of that space. So maybe we're going around, and I don't know, but maybe we're going in circles. Maybe we can even go back to the educational use and combine it with some extended rec use. I'm not sure, but I think that there are still, believe it or not, some other avenues maybe that we need to go down. I think it's an important asset, as Mike has said. It's a very important asset to the town, and I do believe that housing creates a real big issue there, whatever type of housing it would be. I also think, the town hall is a possibility there too, although, we got all sorts of mixed messages. So,
Angela?
So I think anything we do has to end up with that building not costing us a ton of money. I think our residents are pretty much at the end of their ropes in terms of the tax increases we've been putting on them. So I think that maybe we can do a lot of nice things there and pay some more basketball or something. But if they're playing there, they should be covering the cost of running the building. And if we can't do that, let's stop being foolish. We don't cover the cost of the community center.
And to me, the best use of that building would be an incubator for startup businesses.
Yeah.
But
Okay, Mr. Gunderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to clarify a little bit, if I could. First, I had a question for Chris. The expense pages that you had in the packet, there's some fairly large items, and I was curious if you could explain. Coastal engineering.
They're the ones that operate the septic system for us. We're under a mandate or a license that we have to maintain and monitor it every day.
Right.
Which is an expensive proposition.
Right, it's
We
about-
share that cost 50-50 with the school department.
Right, so it's about $40,000 out of
About
your total
40,000.
expenses.
That's right.
And you got the largest elementary school in the Cape using the same treatment plant that minimal use middle school is using. Is there any consideration of a better share on that? I know we're paying the bill anyway through the schools, but it just seems like an awful lot of money to be going out of our budget, going into the schools directly, that's all.
Yeah, we did put together, through you, sorry, Mr. Chairman, through you, we did put together, I had a meeting with the folks and asked them if we could try to decommission and go to a lesser septic system. Right now it's a plant, which is the reason why it's expensive.
Right.
It actually, the septic field was about a third or a quarter right now of the actual size.
Right.
So it was gonna be very, very costly to be able to do that, decommission it and switch to a septic system. And the big trouble with this is, from an administration standpoint, how do you make a decision when we don't know what the long-term use is gonna be? Because if it's gonna be housing, then maybe something gets designed for housing. If it's gonna stay as a town use, then obviously we can make some decisions.
Yeah.
But with the fractured nature of the decision-making process, it's hard. So right now, we've kept the arrangement of 50-50 until, and if we do make better use of the building, then we'll get back up into, the numbers of being more equitable.
Okay. I wanted to give just a slightly different perspective on the vote. I looked at the two greatest vote getters. Clearly, the selling it for affordable housing was the biggest. But the wording of the option number 4, and I think it's been brought up already, but I wanted to emphasize it again. It says to be leased or sold. So we've got two advisory selections here that are both talking about the sale of the property. So if you looked at the 1,500 votes that were given and showed some preference in this election, or advice to the Board of Selectmen, you have 44% of the votes in favor of selling for affordable housing, another 26% for selling or leasing for the purpose of a self-sustaining private organization running it. You put the two together, you've got a 70% interest of the voters of the town in not owning that property or dealing with that property in the future. That, to me, is a very compelling mandate that should be at least thought about as to how we can approach giving him an answer for that. Because it's like you asked them to vote, you guys went all through this work of putting the questions together, and as someone else has stated, it's almost like we're throwing it away. 70% gave you a clear message. That's my thought. I can't get inside their head any more than that, so. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I would like to point back out, too, that there was 2 repurposed committees that's each spent a year, 5 people spent a year of their lives having public hearings and listening to the public and reading emails, and they came up with a different conclusion than the advisory ballot question. So it certainly is important, and it's certainly something this board is looking at. Janelle?
Mr. Gunderson, I just wanted to speak about your last point about the 70%. If you recall, I was questioning the wording of question 4 a number of times before the ballots were actually created, because question 4 was very misleading to say sale or lease, but also be talking about a outside organization taking over was very, very confusing. So you might look at it and say, okay, we'll add this percentage to the sale of the building for housing, but I might look at it and say, okay, we're gonna add this to the percentage of people who wanna keep the building from question 1 for moving town hall, because I'm looking at the word lease, but you're looking at the word sale. Just to bring that up for the general public.
Well,
Richard, nobody can hear you at home.
Yeah.
Hold on, Angela.
I think the focus I was trying to emphasize was that it's for the private development, whether it's a lessor or it's an owner. It is not to be run by the town, and I think you've heard that here too. Cultural, great. Multi-purpose, great, but not town. I don't think we'll be a good landlord. We're not a good landlord anywhere, so why should we start now?
Well,
Fine.
we're gonna be at the harbor, right?
Hold on, Janelle.
not there either.
Maybe.
Yeah, separate conversation. Angela?
I think you're wrong a little bit.
Oh, thank you.
In that it's not really, I think, private that's driving that vote. What's driving it is that it's not costing the town money. because that's what's
self-sustainable.
consistent between the two of them. And what you have, I think the public saying is, fine if you want to do housing, it's not going to cost us anything, we'll make a few bucks. Fine if it's a cultural center that's handled privately, and that will at least break even or make a few dollars. And I think that's where the public wants to go. And I think those are the kinds of things we should be looking at.
And I'm looking at it from the least risk, and the least risk is not to be involved in it at all.
That's right.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, so we have a couple things. Chris spent a lot of time and put a lot of effort into this. Let's take up the hot water issue first, so that we can at least leave with an action. The request,
Yeah, I think that we have some money that appears to be available at the end of this budget that we will be losing. I guess my recommendation would be to do the hot water and the portable trailers, were the two recommendations specifically. And we will minimize the cost. We won't do the entire building on the hot water. We'll do isolated areas. I do want to point out one thing, though, that Janelle said I think is interesting. If it's $13,000, that's just for the gym. The only real use of that building right now is just the gym. And, the other point is, I agree 100% that we should not be in the rental business. I just don't think it's fair to try to hire new people to start to put something together until we have a sense for whether it's going to go or not.
thank you, Chris.
So that's all the point I want
Thank
to
you.
make.
So can I get a motion on the, I think I'd like to take them separate.
You take 'em
Peter, go ahead.
separately?
I want to take them separately. I want to take the hot water separate from the buildings.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would move that with funds that are currently available through the end of this year, that we approve restoring minimal hot water service to the middle school in those areas that are being used at the moment, primarily the bathrooms around the gym, I'm assuming.
Correct,
So-
that's right.
So the motion is to approve available funds to restore hot water, minimal hot water, in the areas of the building that are being used.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any
I have a comment.
comments?
My comment's very simple. Until we figure out what we want to do with that, at least some planning, we don't do anything except whatever keeps the insurance rates as low as possible. I think we're being foolhardy because, by the way, that money doesn't get lost. It becomes a thing called free cash.
It will go to.
And it'll go to free cash, and I can think of lots of things we could spend $50,000 on next year.
Peter?
I just think, Angelo and everybody else, unless we're gonna stop the use of anybody going in the building now, which is basically using the gym, I think it's a sanitation issue, quite frankly, providing hot water in that area. We either vote to say nobody's going to the building, period, and then we don't do the hot water. If we're gonna have people go in the building, I think we need to provide hot water in just those specific areas.
Janelle?
I agree with Peter. In addition to what Rec is already using, and I believe there was also some comment about our police department wanting to utilize the space for some training, as well as another community center overflow. I believe it was a weight loss class, or maybe it was Council on Aging. I think it's very important to have hot water there. In addition, the rec department is having a new program that they've never offered before this summer for middle school, older middle schoolers, 7 through 9, or I don't know the age bracket, but there's going to be however many 20 or 30 teenagers there, preteen, daily, and I just think it's very important to have hot water. What if somebody gets cut? Need to wash.
Mr. Chairman, there's some information to me, and I think, quite frankly, we need to have either a policy or decision that says, before we expand anything, any use of that facility, that it comes here for determination, not just let the youth and rec guys do what they want to do. I mean, I think, we're the ones that are have the responsibility for the costs. This is something new I just heard.
Okay,
I
I'll
think
take
it
that
needs
up.
to come to us for authorization, quite frankly.
All right, so let's get through this first thing first.
But
It's been moved.
But it's all tied together with that.
Well, it's not tied together, because the motion is for the space that we're using right now. So
increase the
it's
water.
been moved that we restore hot water in the areas that we're using with available funds, and seconded. Any more comments on that? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? One opposed. Angelo. Thank you. Now let's take up the two buildings behind the portable buildings behind the school. Peter?
Could I just ask you, Mr. Chair and Chris, do you know what the demolition costs would be on those, roughly? Is this gonna be Link showing up with his front-end loader and knocking it down like we did the garage over here?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have a cost estimate yet. We're just trying to get a sense. I guess we would try to first sell it. If there's no takers, then we would do the demolition.
I think we could take the demolition up after if we don't get any responses to the RFP. So I think right now what we'd look for is to go out with an RFP to see if we can sell those.
And Mr. Chair, what I would say, I don't see the value of those two, I just call them portable buildings.
Portable classrooms.
Related to the structure itself. I mean, they were brought there because there was a need for some additional space.
I agree.
So you don't have that need. It's just it's a attractive nuisance, quite frankly.
Agreed.
So therefore, I would move that, assuming the funds are available, first and foremost, we see if we can't sell or get somebody interested in paying to take away those two portable classrooms. And short of that, if that doesn't work out, that we get them demolished and removed somehow, some way. Once we know the cost, though, I think we need to know what the cost is.
That's a motion, I second it.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded to go out with an RFP to try and sell the two portable units behind the middle school. And if we have no interested parties in buying them, Chris will provide us with an estimate for demolition.
Which we will have to vote on.
Well, I was gonna say, if it's within the existing budget, if it's 10 grand to dispose of it, I mean, if, again, I hadn't thought about that. If DPW does it, what we've done in the last two buildings here, we did the part of Albro, and then we did, obviously, the Downey property. I think both of those were, I think it was about 10 grand for Downey, if I remember right. It would be within the 50,000 that's available, so if we don't get anyone to take them, then I would just like to have authorization to do the demo, and as long as it's within budget.
So as part of the motion, I would say we encumber those funds that it would take to knock them down, dispose of them. If we don't end up doing that, they're just flowing to free cash at some point. So.
Sure. Janelle?
I'm concerned about taking away space that could possibly be utilized, similar to the Albra House, where I voted no to take away the garage and the dog leg. I just don't know, if we don't know what we're doing with the building yet, but we want to utilize that money to demolish part of it, unless they are in severe disrepair, which I don't believe they are. I know that it's under the recommendation of Sean Libby to do that, but I hesitate to spend that money on doing anything when we really don't know what we're doing with the building yet. Like Angelo said, that money can go back to free cash. So I just question that.
Thank you. Chris, Sean, what was Sean's take on those two buildings?
I mean, I think he said that, they were really ancillary to it and that they were expensive to operate because, again, they're trailers. I think the one thing that needs to be thought about is it's not bricks and mortar. I mean, this is really a motor home, I guess minus the motor. But, this is stuff that has a useful life of 15 years. And I think those things have been on there well past the useful life. So I don't see it as really a detriment to losing floor space because, again, it's a trailer. I think that's part of Sean's rationale, is that it's a fixture to it. It's not part of the core part of the building.
Thank you. Okay, so moved and seconded to put out an RFP to sell the portables behind the middle school. If no one is interested, they would be demolished if it's within the budget.
If no one's interested in buying it, but would take it away, we would also
Yep.
do that, right?
Buy it for $1.
Yeah.
Okay?
Because we would save the demo costs.
Yeah, I know,
so,
that's
yeah.
why
Yes.
I wanted to
It's
be
gonna
clear that everybody
Generate
understood
the
that.
best
Yes.
return.
Can I
Go ahead.
in this process of the RFP, is it also made available, this information, to the various departments in the town who could possibly use those for any kind of storage while they were rehabbing anything or Saquatucket, or I don't know, I'm just.
Yeah,
asking.
under the procurement law, anytime you dispose of a property, I'm supposed to offer it to town departments. I mean, in this case, I am a member of the building committee for the tech school, so at least my initial reaction is I don't think there's any real potential for using those trailers for them. But we could offer it to other governmental agency, like the tech school. I wouldn't imagine Monomoy would have any interest, but, you know, we could offer it and just, but that is part of the procurement law, is supposed to offer it to other elements of the municipal government to see if anyone has a use.
Thank you. Any more comments? All in favor?
Aye.
So far, I got 2 ayes. Aye.
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 Got 4 ayes.
4 ayes. Any opposed?
Aye.
1 opposed. Okay, and lastly, Chris has done some work, and the topic was interim use. The building is being used. We are fixing the hot water in that section of the building. It is a town asset. We should continue to maintain that building. Chris has had conversation with Carolyn and Eric. It seems as though there is interest in expanding the use. Would it be fair to ask Chris to put together the actual cost estimates on opening and closing that building, the heat, the insurance costs, as well as putting a fee schedule together with staff on what rooms would cost to rent, what rooms we can rent, what rooms would cost to rent, so that this board could look at expanding the use at our next meeting.
Yes.
Chris?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, what I've been doing for the last 2 years, because I have to give some guidance to people. I'm trying to keep the insurance costs down. A vacant building is over $200,000 by itself. What we have been using, and Carolyn can kind of correct me if I'm wrong with this, but I think we've been using the wing that is the gymnasium. I don't think we've had any use of the auditorium, but the cafeteria also gets some use. So I've tried to isolate that we wouldn't use other parts of the building. Because one of the things, when we run minimal heat, that by isolating the other parts of the building, we may use it for storage or benign uses, but by not having that turnover of air, by keeping the building stagnant and having the heat, we significantly save a lot of money. So it's going to be very hard, because again, it's going to be driven by what use is there. We know what the current energy use is on that building, but we're running it at 50 degrees. What happens if a daycare were to go in there? You got to run it, at between 65 and 72. I mean, there's very different criteria. So you could be talking about easily double or triple what the costs are. That won't be known unless we know who potentially would be making use of that space. So I guess what I'd like to do is I can work with Eric and work with Carolyn to see if there's what other potential parties are out there. Certainly I know there's a group that had an interest in using it as a cultural center. I don't know if they have the 501c3 set up to already go in there, or if we're going to run into that issue of, we have a group that's interested in operating it as a cultural center, but they're not ready to go. So there's quite a bit of, but I guess what I'd like to at least continue the existing policy that we've had for the last 2 years of using those areas of the building that are in that section, so we can kind of minimize our costs and only expand on any kind of larger scale into the main building if the board approves this longer-term interim plan.
Janelle?
I like what Chris has just said, so I would like to make a motion, Mr. Chair, that we charge administration with the task of developing a 2-year interim use plan of operation of the former Harwich Middle School, including town use and possible lease agreements with interested nonprofit organizations.
Motion's been made. Any second?
I second it.
Okay. Any comments? Peter?
I'd rather wait, quite frankly, until we hear from folks that might use this thing and what the potential uses are. It's going to take a while to get these numbers together. We don't have to rush into this. I think we need to get some more facts before we move forward with it.
Any other comments? Janelle?
we're already using it. So I think if we were to charge the administration with developing a plan now, then it'll actually shorten the whole process, whereas if we wait for them to bring numbers back to us, it's just going to prolong the process.
What if we don't agree with the plan?
No, they're going to develop the plan right now.
I know, but I'd rather have, if someone came and they said, we want to have indoor canoe lessons, and we decided that's not something that's appropriate. I mean, I think this board has a right to determine what uses are gonna, the building's gonna be put to. And if those things are known, if Eric's thinking of these 4 different programs or whatnot, and we say, hey, can they be self-sustaining? Can they generate enough fee to cover things or not? I think this board has an obligation to say, well, we don't think that should go in there. We do think it should go in there. So I think some more dialogue is warranted before we just say, let's go take this and have another plan come back, and then we all say we don't like that plan.
Well, Chris, I mean, we are using this building now. And,
Yes.
I mean, what is the negative to continuing to use? And I think you're looking for a little direction from this board on use going forward.
Yeah, I think my concern is that by continuing the status quo of what we've done, it's a temporary plan. At some point, the building's gonna have a water leak, something's gonna happen that's gonna kind of drive this thing. And I think that having a more longer-term concept of where are we going, that question, whether, hopefully not tonight, I appreciate that, not tonight, but I think that something has to come out of the board of where do you want to go, in a longer term. And then if we're going to do something for 5 years, then that at least gives Carolyn and Eric the opportunity to start coming back to the board with these license agreements that we've been doing, saying we're going to have 10 classrooms be used for a cultural center wing, and that we have a client that's going to come in and use that. I think part of the rationale as to what I have here is I think we should at least see what the marketplace has. I think to your point, Mr. Chairman, the only official thing that we've received so far, well, there's two facts that we have. One fact is that when we've been out, the only thing we've gotten back is housing. The second fact is we do have 2 departments that have been making use of the building. And I guess what I'm asking is, if we've done this kind of with the understanding that it could be taken away in 30 days' notice, which is what I've kind of told people, it's hard for them to make use of it. 30 days at a time is too short. So if I give staff the opportunity, if they come back and they can only rent 10% of the building, that's going to be an indicator that maybe there's not incubator opportunity out there, or there's not cultural opportunity out there. If they come back in the next year and say, look, we have 75% of the building in use, then I think we get to a point where, yeah, it seems to be a little bit more viable, and then let's turn it over to somebody in terms of having somebody show who we have as clients in there. But I think making decisions based upon very little data and, all this stuff providing what we have in terms of the heating of the building now, I mean, it's irrelevant to what the actual potential use could be.
Right.
I'm trying to move the dialogue so we can make a decision in terms of that.
Thank you, Chris. Angelo?
Well, you see, I think it would be easy to rent the building if you rented it for $1 a month or $1 a year, but that won't cover the costs. So the first thing we have to make sure of is not rent anything or use anything in that building that's going to cost us money. Because why would we do that? Why in God's name would we do that? And oh, by the way, the voters have voted, I think at the 70% level, that we shouldn't be doing this stuff ourselves. I think that's what they voted.
On that, Angelo, I think that's great if you only want to point out the non-binding ballot question that we had. We also have charged 2 different middle school repurpose committees that came up completely different. There was a petition, there was public hearings, so let's take it all into account. Julie.
I think that a 2-year plan kind of plays into exactly what you just said, Chris, which is, first of all, it's hard for the rec to get commitment if we're going on a 30-day basis. 2 years allows them to offer, longer-term ideas that the space is available. In addition to that, I would think that the 2-year plan not only lets us bring in hopefully more programs and bring in some more money, gives us an idea on what the rec or other town agencies can do, but doesn't that also give us more of an opportunity to develop a plan? And to your point, Peter, we don't have to vote on it immediately, but doesn't that also allow us a chance to formulate a plan to look at other options, to go to colleges and universities to see if they want that for satellite? I mean, 2 years isn't a long time at all. It allows the rec or whoever else to have some sort of longer-term offer and to bring some more money in, and it also allows us a better opportunity to reach out and see what the market is. We don't know what the market is because we haven't gone to it. And ultimately, any agency that decides to come in, whether it be a university or any other use, is going to have a certain schedule that they've got to follow in developing a plan, going through ZBA or anything else that's necessary. So that's going to be time-consuming. So why not have a plan, although it's a short-term plan for 2 years, to work over that process in the next several months to develop what can we do with this in the short term?
How many people do you think we're going to have to hire if we load that building? Custodians, certainly somebody at the door. Last time we went through and developed the community center, we forgot about adding a lot of people in. Let's not do that again. So for starters, you're going to have a significant increase in cost. And why do we want to do that?
I think that's an assumption, Angelo, because I don't think that the,
You want somebody
I think that we would be relying on town administration not to, we're basically giving Chris 2 years as an interim plan. We're giving Chris, I'm not thinking Chris is gonna come back and hire 14 people to run that building. Carolyn, can I put you on the spot? Please. I'd like to get your thoughts. Specifically, Chris met with you, he announced that earlier. Chris has proposed a 5-year plan. Janelle has just proposed a 2-year use plan. Just what are your thoughts on that?
Nice of you to put me on the spot. I have a lot of different thoughts, truthfully. You all know how I feel about the community center. It is so near and dear to my heart. I don't want to take anything away from that. I am a resident of Harwich and I voted, so I think that what the voters said is important. I'm not any one of you who is sitting up there, so I can't pretend to be that. I did not sit on the repurposing committee. I do have a mother-in-law who lives with me who's been on the elderly housing list for, gosh, Barbara Ann, I think it's now 6 years that she's been on there. So I can see every component of it. I have had to have community center events at the middle school. I know Eric relies heavily on that building because some of the events are growing. So what do I think about it? I think I'm glad you were all voted and that I work for the town administrator who tells me what to do and I'm going to do it.
So specifically, specifically, do you think programs can grow there and a fee schedule can be created by you and Chris and a plan can continue to evolve? Is there interest that we're turning away? Is there more programs?
Well, I think that we, truthfully, if you really want my opinion, we need to know what you want. Even tonight when Peter said, I don't know what's going on over there, people need to come here, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, we don't even know what's going on in each other's backyard. So I think that if there was a plan, you need to tell us what you want because we're trying to do the job that no one over at that community center wants to do anything wrong. Believe us, believe it, trust me.
Okay.
We want to meet the needs of all the people. We are trying to, and if that means that we need to expand programs like Eric had to do, that's what we're going to do. We really want to make the town a closer-knit community.
Thank you, Carolyn. Peter?
I think we're losing sight of the fact that at town meeting, we voted a new budget, a budget for FY17. It starts July 1st. So all of us are constrained with what dollars are available to do anything. whether it's the community center, whether it's, you know, youth and rec, whatever, they have budgets. And so I think we need to give Chris and the team some time to develop what these costs are to run, whether you want to call it that one wing of the building or whatever. And then I think we need to hear from Carolyn and Eric and whatnot, what's going on there today? What are the programs that are going? I want to hear about that. I want to hear why they're important, how many people are involved. And then, if they have proposals to expand that, what does the fee schedule look like to cover that? Because I agree with Angelo, we're not going to put another nickel into it beyond what's in the budget. So let's not lose sight. We just can't go say we're going to go spend $300,000, I'm making this up, $300,000 on expanding programs there. We don't have the $300,000, so it's got to come from somewhere.
And I don't think there's extra
Can I just
people
ask-
at the
Hold on,
community
Angelo.
center either.
Just a
Barbara?
quick question to follow up on Angelo. Could you take whatever number Chris comes up with, let's say it's 200,000 it costs to run the building, and then say, if you picked 3 parts of the building, pick a number, whatever parts of the building, and divided it up. So if you have classrooms, and you have 15 classrooms, you divide 15 classrooms by 200 grand, add in your custodian, and that should help dictate what you have to get back for each of those classrooms, right? I mean, instead of doing it the reverse and saying, is there 500 organizations out there that'll each pay $50, couldn't you start with what the number is that it costs to run the building? To Angela's point, we don't want to put a penny into it that we aren't going to get back out of it. So instead of making everyone jump through hoops, figure out what that top cost is to begin with, and then divide it by the space that you're deciding you're going to use or not use. And if it's going to be that wing and 8 more classrooms, then you take that square footage and say, okay, we're going to divide that out, and it comes out to $1,000 a month. Who's willing to pay $1,000 a month? And then you get those number of organizations.
Julie?
I just, I think that all of these discussions are important, and I obviously understand the limitations of any budget, of course. But we also have to look at what we're doing by not using the building and devaluating the real estate that exists. So as much as there's a budget, and of course we have to abide by it, and we certainly will, we also have to look at this piece of valuable property and the fact that in the same token that we're looking to spend some money to keep it afloat, we could be costing ourselves other money in the long run if we did choose to sell it. The other thing is we need to be able to come up, to your point, Barbara, what we can afford to charge for rent to be sustainable, but we also don't want to be looking at a situation where we've got a valuable asset that's being undervalued and people are lowballing us on an offer if we were to sell it. Again, I know that that's a future discussion, but those are all part and parcel of this overall discussion of where do we go? And to your point, Carolyn, we need an answer. You guys got to give us a direction. You're right, that's our job. And ultimately, a 2-year plan gives us a shorter period to work from, not 5. I think 5's harder. It's more debilitating because if we do find out a clear direction, now we're kind of in a 5-year versus a 2-year. So I think we kind of help everything by having somewhat of a direction while we try to increase the money coming in. Well, we can't exceed the budget, but we have to have some way to move towards.
Chris?
I do want to, just to Angela's point, I think any plan that goes forward, it would be a revolving account, so we would try to go for self-sustaining. And I think we had this discussion already where we would target a certain amount, $500 per certain spaces, $1,000, and have something, because quite honestly, we have to market something. So we do have those kind of thoughts already in at least in the initial discussion. But again, until we have something concrete that we can offer people, we need something going forward. So we can put those numbers in a rough thing. The one thing I do want to say, in terms of, I've heard education a couple times, and I've been down here now for over 2.5 years. I wouldn't want to put any use in that school. I think a kindergarten that doesn't compete directly with Monomoy, I think is a good idea. But we have had a proposal or an interest, an inquiry about doing a charter school that would be in direct competition to Monomoy. And the way I look at that is from a finance perspective. If we lose more money in school choice than we make, so at least with this administrator, I would not want to make any recommendations that would kind of, we value here, but then we're losing it in another spot. So I would, colleges and
Yeah,
preschools would be the target, or after-school programs, but nothing that would have a negative impact on our school system.
Well,
Hold on one second, Angela.
Sharon Flieger, resident. You brought up the comment about that there were two committees that were evaluating possibilities of what to do with it. I don't know that it's appropriate to ask the question. What were the outcomes of those, and are any of those proposals, any of the questions that were put to the vote, the non-binding vote? I guess my question is, like, whatever happened to those results from those committees?
So the first committee came back with one housing option. It was a Stratford Capital proposal for 65 units, and the selectmen chose not to move forward with that. Peter, is that correct?
Yep,
Correct.
that's correct.
The second committee, the first option was the town should retain ownership of the property, existing buildings, and further explore the use of the buildings as a town entity in combination with community uses expressed by nonprofit groups within the RFI. This action should include, yet not be limited to, exploration of the sale of other town buildings presently occupied as to offset costs and encourage consolidation. That was our number one recommendation from the committee, the second committee.
Okay.
And then there was two other ones. The third option was the housing, to go back out with an RFI for housing. And the second one was to tear the building down.
Now, these committees, when they came up with their proposals or what they thought they should do with those, were any of the people of the town, besides the committee, did they have any input? Is that
Yes.
where they got their?
Yeah, there was public hearings, and there was a lot of people that attended the meeting. The public was involved. In the packet, if you read through tonight's packet, you'll see some emails, the public hearing notes.
All right.
So there was a fair amount of community involvement.
All right, that was just into where we were. I mean, the fact that you had them, I didn't know what you did with the results and why. If you had two committees set up, came back with what their purposes were, why we ended up not taking at least one of them.
Again, this is a very important issue for the town of Harwich, and a very tough decision. Angela, you had a comment?
yeah,
Or you-
I had two comments.
Go ahead.
One is that one of those committees, I believe the first one, did check with every college or university they could find to see if anybody would be interested in using that middle school for that kind of a program. I believe they're doing that in Yarmouth at this point, but they couldn't find one. The second point is, when you do the costing, the other thing you have to figure out is there any negative impact to the community center? Because if, for example, we take all of the pickleball out of the community center, there's going to be a negative there, and that doesn't make any sense, to Carolyn's point. So I think just taking everything and moving it
Yeah, I
is not
think, at least from my
a big deal.
standpoint, the only reason why I would use Eric and Carolyn is because they're in the business of renting the
I understand
facility. And secondly, it's a cultural center. I don't view this at all as a community center. So we would look for things that augment or are different than what we currently offer.
So, we're not going to make the decision on, and housing is a very important issue for the town of Harwich. I think we all recognize that. We're not going to make the decision on what we're going to do long-term with this building tonight. What's before us is to expand or to let administration know that we can go forward with the interim use. We have picked that one wing, correct, Chris?
Correct.
I imagine if we expand outside that one wing, Chris is gonna come back with costs. I mean, this stuff, we do have to work inside of budgets. So we're looking at expanding and continuing the interim use until we make our decision. Doesn't mean we're gonna stop looking at housing, doesn't mean we're gonna stop looking at any of the other options. It's gonna give us more time and use the building that we own in the interim. Peter?
So what's wrong with not voting anything tonight and come back with the vision? Why can't we see the vision for what that wing's gonna be? It's gonna be 58 pickleball games, it's gonna be 14 basketball games. Let's understand what we're gonna try and use it for, and then work out all these numbers and back into it and see if it makes any darn sense. You don't need to, I don't think tonight we have to say we're doing this for 2 years. Let's come back in 3 weeks or something and say, have Eric and Carolyn tell us, okay, if you're allowed to use that wing, what's the vision? What are you gonna try and do in there?
Any other good, Janelle?
The motion actually allows for possible lease agreements with some of these entities that did submit RFIs back in 2015, or maybe others who may want to come forward, such as the alleged cultural center idea that was on the ballot. So I think, if in 3 weeks' time, I'm not sure much is going to change for Chris, and there's not much more information that we can get.
Well, Eric's not here tonight. I'd like to hear from him as to what he's
Well, he provided us in our
I
packet.
want to hear from him. I don't want to hear a written thing. I want him to come before us and say, this is what we're using it for. Tell us how important it is to have this facility. Tell us what he's going to use it for, how many people are involved. Let's get a sense for it before we just say, oh, go do it.
Chris, based on Janelle's motion and your recommendation tonight, there's nothing excluding us to get out of anything that we make a decision on tonight.
Yeah, one of the things, just in terms of term of art, I've been trying to use license agreements. The reason why I use license agreement is technically you have to go to town meeting for leases. So I've been trying to avoid that. And also license agreements do allow us to get out at any time. Not as marketable, obviously, to say, well, we'll give you a year's license agreement, but it can be terminated at any time. So not necessarily as marketable, but it is something that the Board of Selectmen can issue licenses at any time. So the reason why we've been using that form is to have that flexibility, Mr. Chair, that you're talking about.
So it's fair to say that if a year from now, if we continue this interim use and expand on the interim use within budget, somebody shows up and wants to buy the building, we can stop everything that we're voting to do and sell the building.
Somebody's leased it.
Well, he's
The
saying
license,
license.
Licensing agreement, okay.
Put that in
So-
the license agreement.
Put that in the agreement.
Well,
Janelle?
I'd like to amend my motion to say possible license agreements instead of lease agreements with interested nonprofit
At this point,
organizations.
can you read the motion again?
I will reread it. So this is how it should be. Mr. Chair, I move that we charge administration with the task of developing a 2-year interim use plan of operation for the former Harwich Middle School, including town use and possible license agreements with interested nonprofit organizations.
can I just comment on that? So the only issue I would have with that is I think it's great for a license agreement because we can get out of it. On the flip side of that, if you're trying to engage somebody to see if they have an interest, then they're going to say, well, why do I really want to do that if I'm going to take a license and then yet you can still kick me out? So once again, I think we're back to saying, well, do we defeat our purpose by seeing who's willing to commit longer term? If we say license, if you're somebody who's hoping to go in for 2 years, say, or a year, initially with the idea that you might be able to stay longer, you're going to look at that license agreement and say, well, I mean, I could do this, but then I could go down the street and do this and get a lease for a year or two.
Yeah, I think to that comment, and I had this discussion with Carolyn and Eric, that whatever decision the town makes in terms of doing a long-term lease, sale of the building, it's going to precipitate town meeting. I think right now the underlying zoning is single family. So you're not doing too much unless you change the zoning.
Right.
Because I don't imagine someone's going to buy a 79,000 square foot building as a single family residence.
Yeah.
So I think there are different elements, and so we will have at least some element to be able to say to people that you're most likely looking at having a year window.
Okay.
And they'll have lead time because, well, in this case, government goes slow, and if we wait for town meeting, they'll have plenty of lead time to know that it's
So
coming.
that's something we could say to them.
Yes.
Okay, so that makes it more.
Angela?
I would like to modify the motion.
Mr. Chairman, you have a motion that has no second, and there's been 2 discussions
Thank
about
you.
changing
Yeah.
it. Just
So
just for
Janelle's-
secretarial
Second,
keeping.
Janelle.
So,
Second.
and Janelle's motion was an amended motion, so are you seconding the
And
amendment?
I'm seconding
Okay.
it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. And so we have an emotion and an amended motion
Okay.
that's been seconded.
And what what I would like to do is say, excuse me, you're choking now. is that for the 2-year period, this year and next year, you do not go over the budget that you have already have approved for that building.
Yeah, legally I can't, so any
Well,
plan would have to
there
be
are
within-
ways to adjust monies. I understand that, do that too.
So that's an amendment. Anyone gonna second that amendment?
I'll second that amendment.
This
Okay,
way, this way you make a profit on it.
okay. All right, so let's vote first on Angelo's amendment.
We get a clarification?
Can we get a clarification, Janelle?
Angelo is saying that, based on my amended motion, that Chris will not go over budget.
Within the existing budget.
He will stay within the existing budget.
In other words,
And can he only do that on the 1 year?
Is
'Cause
is
that's
that
the
the
budget.
FY '17 budget
That's
that
right.
you're saying would be also the same, proposed to be the same for
Sure.
FY '18?
Sure.
Now I'm asking for clarification.
yes,
In other words, it stays level.
that's right. And therefore, anything that is put in there
Sorry, Charlie.
will be making a profit,
So what is the cost to run that building?
about $200,000, right?
Mr.
You know
Mr.
what?
Chairman, one legislative body
Chris, thank you.
you can't do 17 and 18. We already have
We'll
the
do
17
17.
budget.
I'll
Right.
take
I
17.
understand the intent, and we'll try to live up to that intent.
Well, I mean, because that's what everybody keeps on saying, and all I'm doing is saying, okay, if you think you can do that, I'm just
All
making a
right,
point.
so the people at home have to understand what we're doing. Now,
I don't
it's been moved and seconded. I will tell you, on Angelo's motion, he's asking us to project out a year on costs we're not sure with yet. So that's been, you're
I'm not
asking
saying-
to stay within the FY '17 budget and FY '18.
No, I forget that I understand that we can't do it
Just
in
within
18.
17.
Okay, so you're gonna, so Angelo's motion is to stay within the FY '17 budget.
Sure, because everybody's been saying we will be making profit by covering costs by doing this.
Peter?
And Mr. Chairman, you just eloquently made my point that I see no reason why we can't wait for 3 weeks to do this. And we have the financial numbers in front of us as to what we're actually spending on the building today, what's in our budgets for FY '17, and then we can say, okay, we all agree to do that.
I absolutely
In
agree
principle,
with you.
I'm not in disagreement with a 2-year agreement. The problem I have is, I think we're putting the cart before the horse. Let's get the numbers, let's take the time to spend 3 weeks. What's gonna happen in the next 3 weeks that we're, so urgent to get this done tonight? And then let's look at the numbers, put them up on the screen, have Eric and Carolyn and the town administrator explain what they're gonna do with that building, what they're gonna do with that wing, and we vote it.
All right, I'm gonna start with Angelo's motion. So if Angelo wants to withdraw his motion or leave it, you wanna leave it? I'm gonna call for a vote on it, because the motion is on the table and it's time to end this conversation. So, clarification on Angelo's motion is he wants to stay within, Janelle's motion, Janelle, would you read that again?
Jesus.
The first one, so everybody understands it,
The first one, not the amended?
first one.
No,
The amended,
amended.
Let's do
the
the
amended. We're
amended.
getting rid of that first one.
Let's get rid of the
Yes.
first one.
Okay.
I move that we charge administration with the task of developing a 2-year interim use plan of operation for the former Harwich Middle School, including town use and possible license agreements with interested nonprofit organizations.
Okay, and Angelo's amendment.
That this be handled within the 17 budget
Okay, any comments? All in favor?
for the building, let me add, not
All in favor of Angelo's amendment?
Aye.
anybody. Oh, yeah.
2 ayes? All opposed? Aye. So 3 opposed.
Now,
The
I just-
amendment doesn't pass.
Okay, I just want
So
to,
back to, the amendment doesn't pass. I'm gonna get this voting stuff out of the way. The amendment doesn't pass. The second motion, Janelle's amended motion that she just read. Any comments on that?
yes, that doesn't do what you said you wanted to do, and what you said you wanted to do was to cover the costs and increase it. There's no guarantee by approving that amendment that you'll get anything except, you could get a loss, you can get anything you want. I don't see why we would vote to do that. There are people out there who are paying a lot in taxes.
Well, my comment on that is, I think Chris and administration has heard loud and clear that we are we're voting to extend the interim use and possibly expand, but we have talked about budget. That's what Chris does. He knows what he can do and what he can't do. We're using the building now,
No.
so I don't understand why
Because
we need to get all the facts and figures that we already have.
Because the budget's like $25 million or so, right? Or 50, whatever, it's a big number. I'm saying you have to stay within the budgets for that building. I assure you that Chris can stay within the larger budget, but I'm talking about the budget for the building.
$125,000.
Whatever, it's 125,000, if we stay within the 125,000, it means that we're moving in a positive direction and doing what the voters has asked us to do, and that's not to spend a lot of money on this.
But I would point out too that that budget, the 125,000, also didn't include any income.
What do you
Correct?
mean?
We brought
Didn't
13,000
include any what?
income.
Income, yeah, that's correct.
So we're gonna add income to that 125,000 with the
We
way
just
you're
don't know
saying.
what that income is, because we have no
Well,
idea.
13,300 to start. Okay, so I'm gonna
Whatever
call.
that income is.
I'm gonna call for
But
Janelle's motion. We're gonna go to vote on Janelle's motion. Any more comments about Janelle's motion? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
I'm opposed.
2 opposed. Okay, now the original motion
I didn't catch Julie's vote.
was aye.
It was 3-2.
Now, the original motion we have to remove, correct?
No, because
You voted the amended motion, the amended main motion, so
Okay.
that's sufficient.
Okay, excellent. On to the next. C, Chris?
Actually, the next one is the liaison
Oh,
assignments.
the liaison assignments,
I'm going to
correct.
excuse myself, I'll be right back, though.
Okay. So you're all given the proposed liaison schedule, who you will be the liaisons to. Anyone have any comments on that? Or a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move that we accept and adopt the Selectmen liaison assignments for fiscal year 2017.
Any second?
Second.
Peter seconded.
Any comments on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. I guess we'll wait for Chris to get back for the next one. On the liaisons, the liaison policy was also included in the packet. There has been mention from the clerk's office that a lot of the, not a lot, but a percentage of the committee members have not been sworn in. So could we make a effort to reach out to the chairman of each one of these committees and see to it that all members of the committee are sworn in and have taken the ethics test?
Well, 13th, this is when they wouldn't have received notification because we've just reappointed them.
So we want to just make sure that we continue to
Yeah.
stay on top of people being sworn in and taking the ethics test.
So do you want each liaison, when they contact the committee for the first time, to tell the chair of the committee that they need to make sure everybody has taken the ethics?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda, we can get started, I guess, is selection of McGinley, Kelsaw and Associates, Inc. for the library painting restoration project funded through CPC. So we had a conversation about this a couple weeks ago, and Chris had spoken to Bob Caffarelli, the town engineer, about it, and he noted that we didn't take an action. So the request and Sean Libby's recommendation was that we go forward with McKinley, Kelsaw and Associates for the design engineering on the library.
I think it's no secret, I'm not a big fan of the work they did before. I would suggest that as long as the contract is $25,000 or less, I would go with them. But if it's going to be greater than that, I would put it out to bid, quite frankly. This is a painting project. It's a de-leading and painting project. We're not adding onto the building. We're not doing anything structural to speak of. It should be very straightforward.
Okay. Chris, we just kind of announced the C, and Peter's recommendation was if it stays $25,000 or less, that we go with them. If it's over 25,000, we go out to bid with it. Can you,
That's a motion.
that's a motion. So we have a motion. Anyone want to second that motion?
I'll second it.
Okay.
Well, I guess just a question. I'm happy to try to contain the cost, but in terms of if they do the design spec, is that also having them come back? My recommendation was to let Sean have some parameters that they would design out the process that would renovate it or do the renovations, put that in, we would do the bid spec, but that's the detail element of the spec that they would put together. But then if there's questions about it, or if we want to have them inspect the type work, is that just design, and then there's another contract that we could do for contract administration, or is that just limited to, or is it both?
Peter?
If you want to consider that project management, I would say it's an hourly
An hourly basis?
hourly reimbursement, quite frankly, plus expenses.
Above the 25 or
Yeah.
within the
Yeah,
25?
no, above the 25.
Okay,
The
that's all.
25 gets you to the design documentation package, so that you can go out to bids.
I don't remember what the original spec was for it. I thought it was closer to 60, but we can live within the 25, you know, we could try to live within the 25.
Well, okay, I'll just tell you, I just did a project as extensive as this one, $24,000, so.
Okay.
It can be done.
Peter, can you repeat your motion, please?
Motion is to authorize, Sean Libby's recommendation on McKinley, Caslow, and Slow and Associates for library painting restoration design work, provided that the cost does not exceed $25,000. If it does exceed $25,000, that we would go out to bid.
Okay. And that's been moved and seconded. Any comments?
Who seconded?
I second it.
Angela? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Angela?
Aye.
Unanimous. Okay, on to new business. Any new business? Town administrators report.
Just on that, I want to just make at least a comment, just to save myself here. We can negotiate under 25,000. They may come back with change orders. So I will make sure that I'm in the meeting and say, look, it's 25,000 irregardless. So we will drive that message home. But if it's 24,999 and they come back with a $5,000 change order, that I can do what I can do, but if there's some unforeseen thing that gets identified, you know, we'd be back. So just to comment on that. I don't normally do that, but I've done a fair amount of negotiations, and sometimes things happen. Under the town administrator's report, just a couple. I just wanted to, we did receive, and it's in the package, a letter of appreciation and recognition. I believe it was a builder or a property owner in town that had a good interaction with the community development department. I know that department's had quite a bit of controversy in the time that I've been here. And I just thought it would be important to, we've talked about them in some ways, and I thought since we got this letter of appreciation in, that I should share it with the board and obviously with the community. So that is a work in progress, so we continue to try to make improvements upstairs. The next item I have is on Beach Road. I went up today with staff to look at the Beach Road. We did get a response also from the town attorney that there was no additional information that occurred. I was going to ask the board members, the agreement that was reached in 2013, was that negotiated by Coleman and Page, or was that done by Mike Ford?
No, it was Coleman and Page.
It was Coleman and Page? Okay.
I believe.
So I just
The
wasn't...
documentation says that.
Actually, the 2009 said
The 2009 said Coleman and Page. There was no attorney sign-off on the 13 one that I recall, so I was just curious whether that was done by Coleman and Page.
I think it was Coleman and Page.
I would
Well,
think.
if you do think of it, if you let me know, I'll put in another inquiry. They said there was no other action in their files, so
Linda was
what we
the
had,
chair.
what we had.
You could also ask her.
Okay,
We'll go back and look at minutes.
yeah, we'll take a peek. I had mentioned last time about the library language that was House Bill 3708. now Chapter 117 of the Acts of 2016, that was signed by the governor June 3rd. So that removed the word professional, which gives the administration of all staff to the library trustees. Also, I know the board wasn't formally to have a meeting on the 20th, but we have the meeting on the 20th scheduled for purposes of doing the
Cumberland Farms.
yeah, I'm sorry, the Cumberland Farms underground storage tank. We did have today, we changed financial advisors. They did a bond sale. They are looking for a board vote. There was nothing on the agenda tonight, but we are banning is a bond anticipation notes. So we did ban about $3 million, and I would like to see if we can get that on June 20th. Those bans all come due at the end of the month, so we need to get that squared away. So that's kind of more of a housekeeping item, but if that could be on the board, and that's several signatures, just, you guys have signed them before for those members that have been, so the bond sale. It came in just above 1%, which I thought actually was a little bit on the high side for the municipal marketplace. Anyway, so that, if we could have those two items on, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
The meeting of the 20th, I'm actually gonna be, I'm trying to use my vacation time, so I'm gonna work in the morning, but that's gonna take the afternoon and evening off, so I leave it to Charlene to be in attendance for that one. Anyway, the next item on the plastic bag ban, just as a reminder to folks that this Wednesday is the implementation date of that, June 15th, Wednesday, June 15th. We had a meeting this morning with Jeremy from the chamber, and you know, he hasn't reported back. We sent out everything that we had in our system for regulatory, anyone that had food establishments and things of that nature. There's certain ones that we would not have any opportunity to license, any kind of car parts place or something like that. We don't have those in the system per se. So Jeremy at the chamber sent out that plastic bag ban through his email list as well of everyone that's in the chamber. He reported today to us that there was he's not getting any negative feedback. And actually, I think he made, which is kind of a good point, that the folks at Stop and Shop actually put in there that Harwich is turning green, which I thought is a better way to present it than a plastic bag ban. So it's just maybe food for thought for the future to try to put things in a more positive spin than a negative spin, because obviously plastic bag ban has a negative connotation to it.
And the exemption for?
Yeah, actually, we also did receive, there's a charity group in the community that gives out donations, and they were concerned that can they use plastic bags, and we did check just with council just to make sure. But it says for the sale of products, so any kind of donation, so anybody that's engaged in a charitable enterprise would not be subject to the plastic bag ban. So we're not going to require they go out and get the bags, the alternative bags. We also, on Route 39 in Pleasant Bay, we have a very dangerous intersection. I think I've alluded to this. I think there was some concern about why were people out there. Staff did go out, myself, the engineering folks, DPW, and then folks from Mass DOT to kind of look at that situation, and as well as the Cape Cod Commission, their traffic people. So we are putting together a report. There was no public meeting or anything like that. When staff goes out to look at a situation, it's a staff meeting. It's not a public meeting. When we get the results, through you, Mr. Chairman, we'll definitely bring that to the board and ask to have that on the agenda. But I think the neighbors hopefully will be happy, because originally I thought that we would head towards, and we may still need to have a roundabout there in which to make that traffic condition safer. But at least some of the data that we've seen so far is that some of the interim steps may have had a positive impact. So we may not get to the rotary. But part of the reason that we're doing this in the first place is there was a fatality at that location. So this is a serious issue, and you know, this isn't just something as a make-work project, but we're trying to keep people safe that travel through our community. Also, just I mentioned about next week being off. I am planning on, my wife and I have a wedding anniversary, our 25th wedding anniversary will be this year in October. My two older kids go to school, so I have a young one that I need to take care of. Long story short is I got to go away while my older kids are home, so I will be trying to use my vacation time in the summer, so I may miss a few meetings, but we'll make sure that either I'm here or Charlene's here as well. Also, I have, coming up on the end of the fiscal year, for me, is a busy time because we have several performance evaluations that need to be done. So I am in the process, I actually did the chiefs on Friday, the police chief. So we have the fire chief done, the police chief I just did, and I'll get that to you. I would ask that we do similar process to last time. We'll have an executive session prior to the meeting, have a discussion in regards to any contract issues, and then add that item on the agenda. We could do that, I think, on the 27th. I don't think there's any negative ramifications for doing that. And then I know I received some comments back in regards to the finance director and some of the discussions in regards to that topic. And I think I only received one from you, Julie, but if there's anyone else that had comments, if they could get those to me, because I will need to meet with him to have those discussions. And I think that concludes my comments this evening, Mr. Chairman.
Great, thank you. Selectmen's report, start with Peter.
I just ask, I think stickers start up again July 1st, right?
Yes, the stickers are start going on sale. It started last Friday, the 10th. And I actually tried to recruit the local press to come out with me today to check out we do have the reading system for the plates that are implemented. So it's a different system than we've used in the past. And to try to get a little bit more publicity for folks to know that if they register their car, there is a license plate recognition. That will operate only for the transfer station.
Okay, so when people go to get a sticker, they're advised of all that?
Yes.
They're provided with some kind of documentation? Do you have anything?
Yeah, I don't know if we have specific documentation on it. We'll put something on the website.
We gotta have something at,
Yeah.
Next meeting or two that just says, hey, this is what's gonna happen at the transfer station when you show up with your car and because it's gonna be a surprise. Guaranteed. Is the read rate getting better and better? I mean, is it pretty good these days? Do we know?
Well, that's what I wanted to go look at today, but
Oh, okay.
we'll get out in the next couple days to check it.
Okay, thank you.
Janelle?
I had the opportunity to speak with Larry Brookhart, who is the technology teacher at Harwich Elementary School last week when I was volunteering there. And he showed me some new equipment for his observatory. Apparently, this observatory, which I did not know, is the premier observatory of Cape Cod. So there is actually a star party tomorrow night, but he also was hoping that the board may come next Monday night around 8 o'clock. He would like the Board of Selectmen to come to a star party, so I thought I would extend that invitation after the meeting. I will not be at that meeting. It is the 4th grade end-of-year assembly at 5:30, so I will be there.
Janelle, where is that
That's at Harwich Elementary School, and it's at the back, so it's where the playground is.
Okay, and that's where everyone will meet.
Yep.
Thank you.
Excuse me, just be clear, you won't be at next Monday's, I guess,
Meeting.
special meeting? I won't be either,
Right.
just so you know, so.
Yeah, we have Julie, Angela, and myself.
Okay, as long as you have 3, I just
Right.
wanna make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Julie? Selectmen's. Angela?
Yeah, just one thing, excuse me. At the end of last week, there was an article in the Cape Cod Times, and it's basically about the Pleasant Bay Collaborative joining an organization that is dealing with climate change broadly. And it's an organization of things like, let me get the right list here. The Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce, the Cape Cod Commercial Fishermen's Alliance, on Cape Cod Commission, et cetera, et cetera. And I was surprised because I had no knowledge at all that this was going on. And it's kind of a strange group if you read all the other people that are involved with it. So I was wondering if we could write a note to the Pleasant Bay Alliance and ask them questions like do they have support of the other towns to do this, other 3 towns besides us? Have they or will they be using town funds that we give them to pursue this activity? I'm kind of surprised they didn't talk to us beforehand. But the other problem I have is this is all about climate change and those kinds of activities, which are very interesting, but they only deal with a quarter of the town, actually. So if we were going to put a team on there, I would think we might have people from other areas of town also. I am not suggesting that we do anything, because I don't know much about this group except what was in the article. So I know we really can't discuss that because it's not on the agenda, but I thought it was interesting to get information and perhaps have somebody tell us what's going on. I can read, if you want me to, I can pass this around or read to you the other groups that are involved with it, which I found very interesting.
You know, I would think it would be appropriate if we invited Caroline to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think if anyone has any questions for the Alliance, I think send them to me. I'll consolidate them and send a request for the Alliance to come before us.
But one of the questions is that within their charter or?
I don't.
I don't know.
Yeah, so if you could, anyone that's got questions for them, send them. I'll pre-send them to Carol and ask her to come to our meeting, and we'll get them on the agenda, Chris.
Just on Pleasant Bay, that just reminded me a couple things. One, we are working with David Young to do that material. I think there's a meeting next Wednesday morning for the wastewater implementation committee to have a discussion in regards to that. I do want to say that the board signed off on that letter last week that Carol had said you submitted to the board, and we sent that out because the board members signed it. I don't think we were supposed to send that out because I thought that cover letter needed to be changed. I do think, I happened to see last Thursday, Paul Niswicki was at a meeting, and he told me that I believe Brewster only took it under advisement, having their chair signed, and Orleans and Chatham have not yet signed that. So I think I'll check in the morning. I think Sandy's actually in not tomorrow, but Wednesday. But just to let the board know that when you sign things in the packet, if we don't officially vote them, we need to make sure we pull them out. So that was kind of my bad as well, but just FYI.
Okay. Only thing for me, Peter, and I forgot to bring it up under Selectmen Liaison Assignments, but I thought it fitting under that topic. I'd like, you've been put on the wastewater implementation committee. Would you take the Chatham Harwich negotiating team with Angela?
Yep, sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yep.
And with that, I'd say make a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Someone left keys. Hey, Bill, somebody left some, are those your keys? Oh, okay.